The call came at 3:17 a.m., her sobs cutting through the darkness like shattered glass. "Eleanor, please," my daughter-in-law gasped between heaving breaths. "You need to come now. I don't care what Michael said. Please, I'm begging you." My heart stopped as I heard my son's angry voice in the background, followed by something breaking against a wall. I sat frozen in my bed, the phone trembling in my hand. Just 2 weeks ago, my only son had stood in my kitchen, his face contorted with rage, telling me I was dead to him, that I would never be allowed to set foot in his house again, that his children, my precious grandchildren, would be better off without a toxic, manipulative witch like me in their lives. The digital clock glowed red in my darkened bedroom, the silence of my empty house closing in around me. At 63, I never imagined I'd be alone like this, banned from my own son's life as if I were a criminal. 37 years of motherhood erased with a single conversation. "Eleanor, are you there?" Jessica's voice cracked, dropping to a whisper. "There's blood. I don't know what to do." My body moved before my mind could catch up. I was already pulling clothes from my dresser, fingers fumbling with buttons in the dark. "I'm coming, sweetheart. Lock yourself in the bathroom with the kids if you can. I'll be there in 20 minutes. He'll be furious if he sees you," she whispered. "I don't care," I said, surprised by the steel in my voice. "I'm coming." Outside, the April air bit at my skin as I rushed to my car. The streets of Portland were empty, streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement. My headlights cut through the darkness as I drove, memories flooding back with each mile. Michael had always been strong-willed, even as a child, but the anger, that came later, after his father left us. After I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over our heads. After I sacrificed everything to give him opportunities I never had. The suburbs gave way to the winding roads leading to the hills where my son's beautiful home stood. The home I'd helped him buy with money from selling my mother's wedding ring. The home where I'd painted the nursery, planted the garden, and rocked my grandchildren to sleep countless nights. The home I was now forbidden to enter. As I turned onto Oak Ridge Drive, I could see the lights blazing from every window of the colonial-style house. A neighbor's porch light flicked on, someone peering through curtains at the commotion. I pulled into the driveway behind Jessica's SUV, noticing the driver's side door hanging open. My fingers clutched my keys so tightly they left impressions in my palm. Whatever was waiting for me inside this house, I knew nothing would ever be the same. A child's cry pierced the night air, followed by Jessica's desperate attempts to soothe. My 4-year-old granddaughter Emma, her voice rising in terror. I didn't knock. The front door was ajar, swinging open at my touch. The entryway, where family photos once displayed holidays, graduations, and weddings, was now bare, hooks protruding from the wall where frames had been ripped down. Broken glass crunched beneath my shoes. "Jessica?" I called out, my voice stronger than I felt. A sound from upstairs, then hurried footsteps. Jessica appeared at the top of the staircase, my 2-year-old grandson Jacob clutched to her chest, Emma hiding behind her legs. Jessica's right eye was swollen, her lips split. Dark red stained the front of her white nightgown. "Oh, thank God," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. "He's in the garage. I think he's looking for his gun." The world tilted beneath my feet, but I steadied myself against the banister. "Get the children in my car. Now." She nodded, trembling as she descended the stairs, the children silent in terror. I moved toward the kitchen, toward the door that led to the garage, something cold and determined settling in my chest. Behind me, I heard Emma's small voice. "Grandma, is Daddy going to kill us like he said?" My blood turned to ice in my veins. I turned to see my granddaughter's wide, frightened eyes, her tiny hand clutching a stuffed rabbit I'd given her for her birthday. "No, sweetheart," I said quietly. "No one is going to hurt you. I promise." I looked at Jessica, her face a roadmap of fear and indecision. "Get them in the car. Lock the doors." As they slipped out the front door, I heard the garage door opening. Heavy footsteps approached. My son, the baby I'd nursed, the boy I'd raised alone, the man I'd sacrificed everything for, appeared in the doorway. His eyes were wild, unfocused. He didn't seem surprised to see me standing in his kitchen. "I told you never to come back here," he said, his voice eerily calm. Something glinted in his right hand. "I know," I replied, not moving an inch. "But I'm here now. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. Until 2 weeks ago, I was simply a retired elementary school librarian living in a modest but comfortable bungalow in northeast Portland. My life had fallen into predictable patterns. Wednesday lunches with my book club, weekend visits with my grandchildren, volunteering at the literacy center downtown 3 afternoons a week. Simple joys sustained me. The smell of fresh bread baking in my kitchen, the weight of a sleeping grandchild on my chest, the sound of rain on my roof as I read by the window. After a lifetime of struggle, I'd finally found peace in these small moments. I'd been a single mother since Michael was 7 years old. His father, Robert, had left us for a paralegal at his firm, moved to Chicago, and started a new family. His child support checks came sporadically for a few years, then stopped altogether. Michael and I never heard from him again. We managed, though. I worked days at the school library, evenings at a local diner, and weekends cleaning houses in the wealthy neighborhoods across town. My mother helped when she could, watching Michael after school while I worked extra shifts. We didn't have much, but Michael never went without what he needed. I scrimped and saved to put him through college, the first in our family to go. When he graduated from Portland State with a business degree, I felt I'd finally done something truly magnificent. The proudest day of my life was watching him walk across that stage, tassels swinging, his future bright with promise. Michael met Jessica during his final year of college. She was beautiful, kind, studying to be a dental hygienist. They married a year after graduation, and I helped them with the down payment on their starter home, a tiny 2-bedroom that they quickly outgrew when Emma came along. 3 years ago, when Jacob was on the way, Michael got a promotion at the investment firm where he'd been climbing the corporate ladder. They decided to move to the suburbs, to the big colonial house on Oak Ridge Drive. I gave them every penny I'd inherited when my mother passed, $47,000 to help with the down payment. Michael promised I'd always have a place there. "Mom, this house will be your security too," he'd said. "When you're older, you'll have the guest suite. We'll take care of you the way you took care of me." For a while, everything seemed perfect. I spent weekends at their house, tending to the garden, baking with Emma, rocking Jacob to sleep. Michael worked long hours but seemed to be thriving. Jessica and I became close. She'd lost her own mother to cancer years before, and often said I was the mother she'd missed having in her adult life. But something began to change about a year ago. Michael started drinking more heavily. Small criticisms about the children's behavior turned into full-blown shouting matches with Jessica. He became controlling about money, questioning every purchase Jessica made, even groceries. I noticed, of course. How could I not? But Jessica minimized it when I asked. "He's under pressure at work," she'd say. "This new client is demanding." Or, "He's just tired, it'll pass." I tried talking to Michael once, gently suggesting that perhaps he was working too hard. The coldness in his eyes startled me. "Don't start analyzing me, Mom. I'm not one of your troubled students who needs fixing." Then came the dinner 2 weeks ago. I'd been invited over to celebrate Michael's latest promotion. I brought his favorite, homemade lasagna and tiramisu. Everything seemed fine through dinner, though Michael drank 3 glasses of wine before the main course. The trouble started when Emma accidentally knocked over her milk. It splashed onto Michael's phone sitting on the table. He exploded, calling his 4-year-old daughter stupid and clumsy. When the child burst into tears, he told her to stop being so pathetic. I should have stayed quiet. That's what Jessica was doing, her eyes fixed on her plate, hands trembling slightly. But I couldn't. "Michael," I said softly. "She's just a little girl. Accidents happen." He turned to me, his expression chilling. "Stay out of this. These are my children, not yours." "I'm just saying, sweetheart. She didn't mean to. Don't tell me how to parent my kids," he snapped, slamming his hand on the table, making the dishes jump. "You don't get to waltz in here and undermine my authority." I looked at my grandchildren's frightened faces, and something inside me broke. Authority isn't the same as cruelty, Michael. You're scaring them. The silence that followed was deafening. Michael stood slowly, his chair scraping against the hardwood floor. "Get out," he said quietly. "Michael, please," Jessica started. "Shut up," he hissed at her before turning back to me. "Get out of my house. Now." I sat frozen, unable to process what was happening. "Michael, this isn't like you. If you're going through something, what I'm going through," he said, voice dangerously controlled, "is finally realizing what a manipulative, interfering witch you've always been. You couldn't let my father be the man of the house, and now you can't let me be either." His words hit me like physical blows. That's not fair. Your father left us. Because you drove him away, Michael shouted, his face contorted. Just like you try to drive everyone away who doesn't worship at the altar of Saint Eleanor, the great martyr mother. Jessica stood then, putting her hand on Michael's arm. Please, let's all calm down. He shook her off roughly. I want her gone. Now. And she's not welcome back. I looked at Jessica, at my grandchildren cowering in their seats, at my son's face twisted with a hatred I couldn't understand. Somehow, I found myself gathering my purse, moving toward the door on legs that didn't feel like my own. Michael, I tried one last time at the door. Please don't do this. Whatever is happening, we can talk about it. There's nothing to talk about, he said coldly. You're dead to me. Stay away from my family. The door slammed in my face. I stood on the porch, unable to move, unable to comprehend how 37 years of love could dissolve in an instant. I drove home in a daze that night, pulled into my driveway, and sat in my car until dawn, too numb to cry. For 2 weeks, I called and texted, leaving voicemails that went unanswered. I sent emails that bounced back as blocked. I even drove by the house once, only to see Michael's car in the driveway and lose my courage. And then came tonight's call, Jessica's terrified voice, my grandchildren's cries. Whatever had been building in that house had finally erupted into something dangerous, something neither of us could ignore anymore. Now I stood in my son's kitchen, facing a stranger with my child's face, wondering how we had arrived at this terrible moment, and knowing the next few minutes would determine whether my family would survive the night. You need to leave, Michael said, his voice flat, emotionless. The kitchen light cast shadows across his face, making him almost unrecognizable. The thing in his hand, I could see now it was a handgun, hung loosely at his side. This is between me and Jessica. Where are they? He demanded, looking past me toward the front door. Safe, I answered, fighting to keep my voice steady. Michael, please put that down so we can talk. He laughed, a harsh sound with no humor. Talk? Like you talked to Dad before he left? Like you talked to every man I ever brought home growing up? Always judging, always finding them lacking? My mind reeled. This wasn't my son speaking, not the boy I'd raised. Michael, I don't know what you think happened with your father, but I know exactly what happened. He cut me off, taking a step forward. He told me everything when I found him last year. The room seemed to tilt beneath my feet. You found Robert? In Chicago. Has a whole other family there. 3 daughters. His smile was cruel. Daughters he didn't abandon because their mother wasn't a controlling nightmare. The revelation hit me like a physical blow. My son had found his father, the man who had abandoned us, who had left us struggling for years, and never told me, had been in contact with him, listening to his version of our past, believing whatever lies made Robert feel better about deserting his child. How long? I whispered. A year. I hired a private investigator after Emma started asking about her other grandfather. He took another step closer, the gun still at his side. Funny how his story about why he left was so different from yours. All those months, all those Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, he'd been harboring this secret, building resentment, believing whatever poison Robert had dripped into his ear. And you never thought to talk to me about it? I asked, pain lancing through my chest. Never thought there might be 2 sides? I knew you'd just lie, he spat. Like you lied about him not wanting to see me. Like you lied about him not paying child support. I stared at my son, stunned by the depth of his misconception. Michael, your father stopped sending checks after the first year. He moved without giving us his new address. His parents wouldn't tell me where he went. How was I supposed to— Stop lying, he shouted, raising the gun slightly, not pointing it at me but holding it ready. He showed me the canceled checks. He showed me the letters you sent back, the court documents where you tried to keep him away. My blood ran cold. What lies had Robert told? What fabricated evidence had he shown our son to absolve himself of decades of abandonment? Michael, I said carefully, whatever he showed you wasn't real. He left us with nothing. I worked 3 jobs to keep a roof over your head. If he'd been sending money, do you think I would have had to do that? Doubt flickered across his face, quickly replaced by hardened conviction. You did that to control me, to make me feel guilty, to make me dependent on Saint Eleanor, who sacrificed everything. He mimicked my voice cruelly with the last words. I felt something crack inside me. the foundation of everything I thought we shared. My son believed I had deliberately kept him from his father, believed I had manufactured our struggles, believed I had manipulated him through sacrifice. And now you're trying to turn Jessica and my kids against me too, he continued, his words slurring slightly. I could smell the whiskey on his breath from where I stood, undermining me, making me look like the bad guy when I'm just trying to be the father, the husband you never allowed Dad to be. Outside, I heard a car door slam. Michael's head snapped toward the sound. "Where are they going?" he demanded, moving toward the window. When he saw my car pulling away, Jessica behind the wheel, his face contorted with rage. "What have you done? Where is she taking my children?" "Somewhere safe," I said firmly, stepping between him and the door. "Michael, you're not well. You're drunk. You're holding a gun. You hurt Jessica. The children are terrified. Get out of my way," he growled, raising the gun higher. I didn't move. "No." His eyes widened in disbelief. "I will remove you if I have to." "Then you'll have to," I said, standing my ground. "But I'm not letting you follow them while you're like this." For a moment, we stood in silent opposition, mother and son, love twisted into something unrecognizable between us. Then he laughed again, that same empty sound. "You think you're so righteous, so perfect." He lowered the gun slightly. "Did you ever tell Jessica about Tampa?" My heart skipped a beat. "What? Tampa, 1997. When you dumped me with Grandma for 3 months while you found yourself with that musician. Did you tell my wife about that?" The memory rose unbidden, my darkest moment as a mother. After 10 years of solitary parenting, of endless work and sacrifice, I'd reached a breaking point, met a man who offered escape, left Michael with my mother while I tried to rebuild my sense of self in Florida. It had been a terrible mistake. I'd come back after 3 months, filled with guilt and shame, promising myself and Michael it would never happen again. And it hadn't. I'd never left him again, never put myself first again. I'd spent the next 20 years atoning for those 3 months. "That was different," I whispered. "I came back. I never abandoned you." 3 months, he shouted. "I was 7 years old and you left me for some guy you barely knew because you were finding yourself." His voice dripped with contempt. "At least Dad was honest about leaving. You pretended you were coming right back." The accusation stung because it held a kernel of truth. I had told Michael I was going for work, would be back in 2 weeks. The 2 weeks had stretched to 3 months. It was the greatest regret of my life. "I made a mistake," I admitted, my voice breaking. "A terrible mistake. I was young and overwhelmed and—" "Save it," he cut me off. "I don't want to hear your excuses. Dad told me everything. How you cheated on him first. How you drove him away. How you used me as a weapon against him. Lies. All lies. But my son believed them, had been nurturing them like poisonous seeds in his heart for a year. So don't stand there judging me for how I handle my family," he continued, gesturing with the gun carelessly now. "You lost the right to judge anyone a long time ago." In that moment, I saw the extent of the betrayal. Not just my son turning against me based on his father's lies, not just the secret contact he'd maintained while pretending everything was normal, but the deeper betrayal, that he could so easily dismiss our entire history together. The bedtime stories, the school projects, the graduations, the celebrations and hardships we'd weathered together. 37 years of love and sacrifice reduced to nothing because of poisonous words from a man who hadn't bothered to call on his son's birthdays. "Michael," I said, fighting to keep my voice from trembling, "whatever your father told you, he wasn't there. He wasn't there when you had pneumonia at 9, and I slept sitting up beside your hospital bed for 3 nights. He wasn't there when I worked extra shifts to pay for your baseball camp because you loved it so much. He wasn't there when I took out a second mortgage to help pay for your college." I took a breath. "But I was. I was always there." For a moment, something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, doubt, a glimmer of the son I knew. Then his face hardened again. "You did those things to control me, to make me feel indebted." He gestured toward the door with the gun. "Now move. I'm going to find my wife and children." I stood my ground. "No, not while you're like this. Not with that gun." His expression darkened. "Last chance, Mom. Move or I'll make you." I looked at my son, at the stranger he had become, and felt tears slipping down my cheeks. "I can't let you hurt them, Michael. I won't." He raised the gun, pointing it directly at me now, his hand trembling slightly. You think I won't do it? You think I won't shoot? I looked into the eyes of the baby I had nursed, the child I had raised, the man I had sacrificed everything for, and saw nothing of him there. I think, I said quietly, that whatever happens next, we've already lost something we can never get back. His finger tensed on the trigger. Time seemed to stop as I stared down the barrel of my son's gun. In that frozen moment, memories cascaded through my mind like falling dominoes, each one knocking into the next, carrying me back through the tapestry of our shared life. I remembered the day Michael was born. 43 hours of labor, my body feeling like it was being torn apart. But the moment they placed him on my chest, red-faced and squalling, nothing else mattered. Robert had been there then, crying happy tears, promising we'd be the perfect family. I remembered thinking there could be no purer love than what I felt for this tiny, helpless creature who depended on me for everything. I remembered Michael's first steps, taken in our tiny apartment kitchen. He'd pulled himself up on a kitchen chair, his chubby legs wobbling, determination on his face. 1 step, 2, 3, then into my waiting arms as I cried with pride. Robert had missed it. He was working late again, a pattern that would eventually become permanent absence. I remembered the morning I woke to find Robert's side of the bed empty, his dresser drawers cleared out. The note on the kitchen table was brief. I can't do this anymore. I'm sorry. Michael had found me sitting there, still in my nightgown at noon, staring at those 7 cruel words. "Where's Daddy?" he'd asked, and I had somehow found the strength to smile and say, "He had to go away for work, sweetheart." The first of many protective lies I would tell. I remembered the night Michael had a fever of 104, how I'd rushed him to the emergency room, terrified I might lose him. I had no health insurance. The policy had been through Robert's job, and we'd been cut off after he left. I signed papers agreeing to pay whatever it cost, not caring if it took a lifetime. I held Michael's burning little body against my chest in the waiting room, whispering promises that everything would be okay, praying I wouldn't become a liar. I remembered selling my grandmother's pearl necklace, the only valuable thing I owned, to pay for Michael's first bicycle. The pure joy on his face on his 8th birthday when he saw it, the red paint gleaming in the sunlight. "This is the best day ever, Mom," he'd shouted, riding circles around our small yard. I didn't tell him I'd been eating ramen noodles for dinner all month to save for it. I remembered the school plays and science fairs where I'd sit alone among couples, watching Michael shine on stage or proudly explain his project. The other mothers would sometimes ask, "Is Michael's father coming?" And I would smile brightly and say, "He's traveling for work." Another protective lie. Michael had stopped asking about Robert by then, as if he'd accepted that fathers were optional, not essential. I remembered the night I found 13-year-old Michael crying in his room, a crumpled birthday card in his hand, the first and only one Robert ever sent. "Why doesn't he want to see me?" he'd asked, his voice breaking. I had held him, rocking him like when he was small, telling him it wasn't his fault, that he was perfect and lovable and worthy. I'd called Robert's parents the next day, begging for his new address, but they refused, saying their son had moved on with his life, and it was better this way. I remembered working the night shift at the diner, coming home with aching feet to help Michael with his homework. The smell of French fry oil clung to my hair as I sat beside him at the kitchen table, helping with algebra problems I barely understood myself, determined that my son would have the education I never did. I remembered skipping lunch for months to save enough for Michael's senior prom, the look of shock on his face when I handed him the money for the tuxedo rental, the corsage, the fancy dinner. "How did you do this?" he'd asked, and I'd brushed it off with, "I've been saving up. This night should be special." I didn't tell him about the payday loan I'd taken out, with its crushing interest that would take me 6 months to pay off. I remembered the day I dropped Michael off at Portland State for his freshman year. We'd loaded my ancient Honda with everything he owned, which wasn't much. I'd helped him set up his half of the dorm room, made his bed with the new sheets I'd splurged on, arranged his books on the desk. When it was time to leave, I'd held him tightly, breathing in his scent, memorizing the feel of my child in my arms. "I'm so proud of you," I'd whispered, fighting back tears. "You're going to do amazing things." I'd driven home to an empty house and cried until I had no tears left, both heartbroken and fiercely proud that I'd raised a son strong enough to leave. I remembered the day Michael met Jessica, how he'd brought her to Sunday dinner at my house, his eyes shining whenever he looked at her. "Mom, this is Jess," he'd said, and the warmth in his voice told me everything I needed to know. I'd hugged her immediately, welcomed her into our small family circle. Later, when Michael went to get more wine from the corner store, Jessica had helped me with the dishes. "He talks about you all the time," she'd confided. "He says you're his hero." I remembered Michael's wedding day, walking him down the aisle myself because there was no one else. The minister had asked, "Who gives this man to be married?" And I'd responded clearly, "I do," my heart so full it could barely contain my joy. At the reception, Michael had pulled me onto the dance floor for the mother-son dance. "Thank you, Mom," he'd whispered as we swayed to the music. "For everything. I wouldn't be here without you." I'd thought my heart might burst with pride and love. I remembered the day Emma was born, how Michael had called me from the hospital at 3 a.m., his voice choked with emotion. "Mom, she's perfect," he'd said. "Can you come?" I'd driven to the hospital immediately, entering the room to find my son cradling his daughter with an expression of wonder and terror I recognized intimately. "What if I mess this up?" he'd asked quietly as I stood beside him. I'd placed my hand on his shoulder and said, "You won't. But when you make mistakes, and you will, you'll fix them. That's what parents do." I remembered painting the nursery in their first small house, Michael and I working side by side, laughing as we got more paint on ourselves than the walls. "Did you paint my nursery?" he'd asked, and I'd nodded, remembering the tiny room in our apartment that I'd painted sunshine yellow while 8 months pregnant. Yellow, because I didn't know if you were a boy or a girl. I wanted it to feel like sunshine. I remembered cooking Sunday dinners at their house, Jessica and I working in the kitchen while Michael played with Emma in the living room, the sound of his laughter mixing with his daughter's giggles. It was everything I'd ever wanted for him, for us. I remembered the day Jacob was born, how Michael had called me in tears because the baby had jaundice and needed to stay in the NICU. "I'm scared, Mom," he'd admitted, his voice small like when he was a child. I'd gone to the hospital, stayed with him and Jessica for 3 days straight, bringing them food, holding Emma at the hospital, doing whatever was needed until little Jacob was released with a clean bill of health. I remembered helping them move into the house on Oak Ridge Drive, how proud Michael had been as he gave me the tour. "And this," he'd said, showing me a beautiful guest suite on the main floor, "is for you, whenever you want to stay. And someday, when you're older and don't want to be alone, it'll be yours permanently. This house is your security too, Mom." I remembered the look in his eyes as he'd said those words, genuine love and gratitude, a son wanting to take care of the mother who had always taken care of him. There had been no resentment then, no accusations, no mention of his father's poisonous lies. I remembered watching Michael with his children, gentle and patient as he taught Emma to ride her bike, as he rocked Jacob to sleep, singing the same lullabies I'd sung to him. "You're a wonderful father," I'd told him once, and his eyes had filled with tears. "I had a good example," he'd replied, squeezing my hand, "of what really matters in a parent." As I stood there now, facing the barrel of his gun, these memories washed over me in an instant. How had we gone from those tender moments to this unthinkable standoff? How could the child I'd sacrificed everything for now look at me with such hatred? How could he believe the lies of a man who had abandoned him over the truth of the woman who had remained? "Michael," I said softly, reaching out my hand, not toward the gun, but toward his face. "Do you remember when you were 10 and had that terrible nightmare? You came into my room, and I made you hot chocolate, and we sat on the porch swing until dawn, counting stars." His hand trembled slightly. "Do you remember when you broke your arm falling out of the McGrath's tree, and I carried you 6 blocks to the emergency room because we didn't have a car that year? Do you remember how I never left your side, even when the doctors tried to make me wait outside?" Something flickered in his eyes. Recognition, memory, doubt. "Do you remember your high school graduation? How I worked double shifts for months to buy you that watch? You said it was the nicest thing you'd ever owned." My voice broke. "You hugged me so tight I could hardly breathe." The gun lowered just slightly. "Your father wasn't there for any of that, Michael. He chose not to be. Whatever he told you about why he left. The fact is, he left. And I stayed. I was there for every fever, every heartbreak, every triumph." Tears streamed down my face now. I'm still here, even now. For a moment, I thought I saw my son again, a glimmer of the man I'd raised, not this angry stranger. Then his face hardened once more. "Nice performance," he said coldly, raising the gun again. "But it doesn't change anything. Dad said you'd do this. Use emotional manipulation. Play the victim. It won't work anymore. The pain of his words cut deeper than any knife. 37 years of love and sacrifice dismissed as manipulation. Our entire history together rewritten by a man who hadn't bothered to send a single birthday card. I closed my eyes briefly, feeling something deep within me break. When I opened them again, I stood straighter, my tears stopping. I won't stand between you and your family, I said quietly, but I won't let you hurt them either. So you have a choice to make, Michael. Right here, right now. I took a step closer, until the gun was nearly touching my chest. If you truly believe I'm the monster your father painted me to be, if you truly think I manipulated and controlled you all these years, then pull the trigger. End it here. His eyes widened in shock. But if there's even a small part of you that remembers the truth of our life together, put the gun down. Let me help you. Because this, I gestured around the destroyed kitchen, at the gun in his hand. This isn't you. This isn't the man I raised. For a long moment, we stood frozen in that terrible tableau. Mother and son, love and hatred, truth and lies. The weight of our shared past hung between us. Decades of memories either binding us together or tearing us apart. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the gun began to lower. The moment shattered as headlights swept across the kitchen window, illuminating Michael's face in harsh white light. The sound of car doors slamming, multiple sets of heavy footsteps approaching the house. Police! Open up! Michael's eyes went wild with panic. You called the cops on me? He hissed, raising the gun again. My own mother? No, I said quickly, honestly. I didn't. It must have been a neighbor. His face contorted with rage. You're lying. This was your plan all along, wasn't it? Take my kids, call the police, have me arrested? He gestured wildly with the gun. Perfect way to get me out of the picture so you can control Jessica and the children. Michael, please, I begged, hearing the officers at the front door. That's not what's happening. Put the gun down before this gets worse. Portland Police Department. We're responding to a domestic disturbance call. Michael's breathing grew rapid, his eyes darting between me and the door. The gun trembled in his hand. I'll tell them you attacked me, he said, his voice chillingly calm despite the panic in his eyes. I'll tell them you broke in, that I was defending my home. My blood ran cold. Michael, don't do this. A loud knock rattled the door. Police! Open up now or we're coming in. In a swift, sudden movement, Michael grabbed my arm, wrenching me in front of him. The gun pressed against my temple. Play along or I swear to God I'll make this worse than you can imagine, he whispered harshly in my ear. The front door burst open, 2 officers entering with weapons drawn. They froze at the sight of us in the kitchen doorway, Michael holding me hostage, the gun to my head. Sir, drop your weapon, one officer commanded, aiming his gun at us. She broke into my house, Michael shouted, his grip tightening painfully on my arm. She's been stalking my family for weeks. I'm protecting myself. I couldn't breathe, couldn't process what was happening. My son, my only child, was using me as a human shield, threatening my life, lying to have me arrested. The depth of this betrayal eclipsed everything that had come before. Ma'am, are you okay? The second officer called to me, her voice steady but concerned. Before I could respond, Michael dug the gun harder against my temple. Tell them, he hissed in my ear. Tell them you broke in, that you're obsessed with my kids, that I've had to file restraining orders against you. The lie he wanted me to tell struck me like a physical blow. He wanted me to confess to crimes I hadn't committed, to paint myself as unstable, dangerous, to destroy not just my relationship with him, but my reputation, my freedom, my access to my grandchildren. Ma'am, the officer called again. Can you tell us what's happening here? Michael's fingers bit into my flesh. Do it, he whispered venomously. Or I swear I'll tell them you tried to kidnap Emma and Jacob. They'll never let you near my kids again. In that moment, I saw with terrible clarity what my son had become, or perhaps what he had always been beneath the surface. Someone capable of using his own mother as both shield and scapegoat. Someone willing to fabricate crimes to punish me for perceived wrongs. Someone who could press a gun to the head that had bent over his crib, checking his breathing in the night. Officers, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. My name is Eleanor Mitchell. This is my son, Michael. He's assaulted his wife tonight and threatened his children. She's fled with them for safety. Michael's grip tightened further, making me gasp. She's lying. She's delusional. She's been harassing my family for weeks. He has a history of alcohol abuse and increasing violence, I continued, looking directly at the female officer. His wife Jessica called me tonight begging for help. There's blood in the house. She has facial injuries. Shut up, Michael hissed, shaking me roughly. Sir, release her now, the male officer commanded, taking a step closer, his weapon still aimed. She's making this up, Michael shouted, his voice cracking with desperation. She's mentally ill. She's been stalking us. Then put down the gun and we can sort this out, the female officer said calmly. Right now, you're committing a crime by holding her at gunpoint. I felt Michael's body tensing behind me, the gun pressing harder against my temple. In that terrible moment, I wasn't sure if my son would release me or pull the trigger. Michael, I said quietly, for his ears only, please don't destroy what's left of your life. Think of Emma and Jacob. They need their father. His breathing was harsh against my ear, his hand shaking. For one heartbeat, 2, 3, the entire world seemed suspended in that fragile moment. Then, slowly, the pressure of the gun eased away from my temple. Put the weapon on the ground and step away from her with your hands up, the male officer instructed firmly. With a sound that was half sob, half growl, Michael shoved me forward roughly. I stumbled, catching myself against the kitchen counter as the officers rushed toward him, commanding him to drop the weapon and get on the ground. The gun clattered to the floor. Michael stood with his hands raised, his face a mask of hatred as he stared at me. You're dead to me, he said, his voice flat and cold as the officers secured his hands behind his back. You understand? Dead. You'll never see my kids again. I'll make sure of it. As the officers began reading him his rights, my legs gave way beneath me. I sank to the kitchen floor, the magnitude of what had just happened crashing over me like a tidal wave. My son, the baby I had nursed, the child I had raised alone, the man I had given everything for, had held a gun to my head and tried to have me falsely arrested, had threatened to fabricate crimes to keep me from my grandchildren, had called me dead to him for the second time in 2 weeks. The female officer knelt beside me, her voice gentle. Ma'am, are you injured? Do you need medical attention? I shook my head, unable to speak through the knot in my throat. I need to ask you some questions about what happened tonight, she continued, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. Can you tell me how this started? As Michael was led from the house in handcuffs, shouting accusations about me over his shoulder, I found my voice. My daughter-in-law called me, I began, my words halting. She said she and the children needed help, that there was blood. The officer nodded encouragingly. And where is your daughter-in-law now? I don't know, I admitted, sudden fear coursing through me. She left with my grandchildren in my car. She was injured. I need to find them. We'll help you with that, she assured me. What's her name and phone number? As I provided Jessica's information, watching the officer call it in, I was struck by the surreal horror of the situation. My family had shattered in a single night. My son was being taken to jail. My daughter-in-law and grandchildren were missing, frightened, possibly still in danger, and I was alone in the wreckage, trying to comprehend how 3 decades of love and sacrifice could culminate in such destruction. The officer helped me to my feet, leading me to a chair at the dining table, the same table where, 2 weeks ago, this nightmare had begun with a spilled glass of milk. Mrs. Mitchell, she said gently, I need to ask, has your son threatened you before tonight? I stared at my hands, seeing the small scars and age spots that told the story of a lifetime of work and care. Work for him, care for him. No, I whispered, not with a gun, but in other ways, she prompted carefully. The tears I'd been holding back finally broke free. He told me I was dead to him, that I couldn't see my grandchildren anymore. I looked up at her, this stranger witnessing the most painful moment of my life. I don't understand what happened. I don't understand how we got here. She nodded sympathetically, jotting notes in her small pad. Has your son had issues with alcohol or anger management that you're aware of? I thought of the increasing drinking over the past year, the outbursts Jessica had minimized, the way he'd changed since allegedly reconnecting with his father. It's gotten worse recently, I admitted. He's been different, angry, drinking more. But tonight, I gestured helplessly at the chaos around us. I never imagined it could come to this. The radio on her shoulder crackled to life. She listened, then gave me a small smile. "They've located your daughter-in-law and the children. They're safe at Portland Memorial Hospital. Your daughter-in-law is being treated for facial lacerations and a possible concussion." Relief flooded through me, leaving me lightheaded. "Can I go to them? They must be terrified." "Of course. I can have an officer drive you. I can drive myself," I said, needing to regain some control over this spiraling nightmare. "Are you sure you're up to it?" she asked kindly. No, I wasn't sure. I wasn't sure of anything anymore, but I nodded anyway. I need to do this. I need to see that they're all right. As I gathered my purse from where I'd dropped it by the front door, I heard the male officer speaking to someone outside. Stepping onto the porch, I froze at the sight of neighbors gathered on the sidewalk in their robes and pajamas, watching the police car with Michael in the back seat. Mrs. Donovan from next door spotted me, her eyes wide with shock. "Eleanor? Is that you? What on earth happened?" Before I could answer, Mr. Peterson from across the street called out, "Is it true? Did Michael attack someone?" Their curious faces, their eager questions. They were watching my family's destruction like it was an episode of their favorite crime show. The humiliation burned like acid in my throat. "Please," I managed, barely audible. "I need to get to the hospital." As I tried to move toward my car, remembering too late that Jessica had taken it, Mrs. Donovan stepped into my path. We heard shouting earlier, and something breaking. Then Jessica ran out with the children. Was there domestic violence? The barely concealed eagerness in her voice made my stomach turn. "Excuse me," I said, trying to step around her. "If you need somewhere to stay tonight," she persisted, "you can use our guest room, and tomorrow you can tell me everything that happened." The thought of recounting this nightmare for her entertainment made me physically ill. "I need to get to my grandchildren," I said more firmly. The female officer appeared beside me then, sensing my distress. "Mrs. Mitchell, I can drive you to the hospital now if you'd like." Gratefully, I nodded, allowing her to escort me to her patrol car, ignoring the whispers and stares that followed us. As we drove away from the house on Oak Ridge Drive, I looked back at what should have been my son's happy home. Police lights flashing against the windows, neighbors clustered in gossiping groups on the lawn, the beautiful colonial facade hiding the ugliness that had erupted inside. He said his father told him lies about me, I found myself saying to the officer, needing someone, anyone, to understand. His father left when he was 7, abandoned us, didn't send child support, didn't call on birthdays, but somehow he's convinced Michael that I was the villain. The officer glanced at me sympathetically in the rearview mirror. Family dynamics can be complicated. I worked 3 jobs to give him a good life, I continued, the words pouring out now. I never bought new clothes for myself, so he could have nice things for school. I went without meals some months to pay for his college applications. I stared out the window at the dark, empty streets. And tonight, he held a gun to my head and tried to convince police I was a criminal. "I'm very sorry this happened to you," she said quietly. "Unfortunately, we see situations like this more often than you'd think." Her words, meant to be comforting, only deepened my despair. Were there other mothers out there, sitting in the back of police cars, trying to understand how their children could turn against them so completely? Other women who had given everything only to be rewarded with hatred and betrayal? As we approached the hospital, its windows glowing in the darkness, I tried to compose myself. Emma and Jacob would be frightened, confused. Jessica would be injured, traumatized. They needed me to be strong now, to be the steady center they could rely on. But as the officer pulled up to the emergency entrance, I remained frozen in the back seat, suddenly terrified of what lay ahead, of seeing Jessica's wounds, of trying to explain to my grandchildren why their father had hurt their mother, why the police had taken him away. "Mrs. Mitchell," the officer prompted gently. I looked up, meeting her kind eyes in the mirror. "I don't know if I can do this," I admitted, my voice breaking. "I don't know how to fix this." She turned in her seat to face me more directly. "You don't have to fix everything tonight. Right now, your family just needs you to be there." She paused. "And from what I can see, being there for others is something you've had a lifetime of practice doing." Her simple words gave me the strength to open the car door, to stand on shaking legs, to walk into the hospital where the remaining pieces of my broken family waited. As the automatic doors slid open before me, I took a deep breath, steeling myself for whatever came next. I had survived poverty, abandonment, decades of solitary struggle. I would survive this too. But walking into that hospital, knowing my son was in a police car headed to jail, knowing my daughter-in-law and grandchildren were wounded in ways both visible and invisible, I felt a grief so profound it seemed impossible to bear. The life I had sacrificed everything to build for my son had collapsed like a house of cards, and standing in the wreckage, I couldn't help but wonder, had it been my fault all along? The hospital corridor stretched before me, its fluorescent lights casting harsh shadows against sterile white walls. A nurse directed me to a curtained bay in the emergency department where Jessica sat on an exam table, a doctor carefully placing butterfly bandages along a cut above her eyebrow. Emma and Jacob huddled together on a chair in the corner, their eyes wide with fear and confusion. Emma spotted me first. "Grandma," she cried, jumping down and running to me. I knelt to catch her, pulling her small body against mine, feeling her tears wet my shoulder. "It's okay, sweetheart," I murmured, though nothing about this situation was okay. "I'm here now." Jacob looked up at the sound of my voice, his face lighting with recognition. He scrambled down from the chair and toddled over, wrapping his arms around my leg. I shifted to include him in our embrace, breathing in the sweet scent of his hair, feeling his tiny heartbeat against my side. Over their heads, I met Jessica's gaze. Her right eye was swollen nearly shut, her lips split and puffy. Darkening bruises bloomed along her jawline, but it was the look in her eyes that broke my heart, a mixture of shame, fear, and overwhelming relief. "Eleanor," she whispered, her voice raspy and thin. "Thank God you came." The doctor finished placing the last bandage and stepped back. "The cut won't need stitches, but you do have a mild concussion. I'd like to keep you overnight for observation, especially given the circumstances." Jessica nodded mutely, wincing at the movement. "I'll arrange for a room," the doctor continued, his eyes flicking to the children, then to me. "For all of you." When he had gone, I moved to Jessica's side, still holding my grandchildren close. "What happened after you left the house?" I asked softly. "I just drove," she said, her eyes filling with tears. "I didn't know where to go. Then Emma started having trouble breathing. She gets asthma when she's upset, and I realized her inhaler was at home." Her voice broke. "I had to choose between going back there or coming here." "You made the right choice," I assured her, reaching out to take her hand. "You protected them. That's what matters." "The police," she whispered, glancing at the children. "They said they arrested Michael, that he had a gun, that he..." She couldn't finish the sentence. "We don't need to talk about that right now," I said gently. I turned to Emma and Jacob, forcing a smile. "Are you two hungry? Should Grandma see if she can find some snacks?" Emma nodded against my side. "My tummy's making growly noises." "Mine too," Jacob echoed, though I suspected he was simply copying his sister. I spotted a nurse passing by and asked if there was somewhere I could get food for the children. She promised to bring something and returned moments later with apple juice boxes, graham crackers, and cheese sticks. I helped the children settle with their impromptu meal, then turned back to Jessica. "How long has this been happening?" I asked quietly, gesturing to her injuries. She looked down at her hands. "The hitting only started recently, maybe a month ago." Her voice dropped even lower. "But the yelling, the controlling behavior, the accusations, that's been building for about a year." The timeline matched exactly with when Michael claimed to have reconnected with his father. The realization sent a chill through me. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, careful to keep any hint of accusation from my tone. Jessica's eyes filled with fresh tears. "He said if I told anyone, especially you, he'd take the kids away, that he'd tell everyone I was an unfit mother." She glanced at Emma and Jacob. I couldn't risk losing them. The same threat he'd made to me tonight, to fabricate accusations, to use the children as weapons. I wondered with growing horror if that particular cruelty was something he'd learned from his father. "And after he banned me from the house," I prompted gently. "It got worse," she admitted. "Much worse. He said you'd poisoned me against him, that I had to choose, you or him." She met my eyes directly. "Tonight, he was drunk when he got home. He saw I'd texted you earlier in the day, just a photo of Jacob's new haircut, and he just exploded." I felt sick, imagining what my grandchildren had witnessed. "Jessica, I'm so sorry." "Don't," she said firmly, surprising me with her sudden strength. "Don't apologize for him. This isn't your fault." Her words struck something deep within me, a chord that resonated through decades of misplaced guilt and self-blame. How many times had I apologized for Robert's abandonment, taking responsibility for his choices? How many times had I wondered if I'd somehow failed as a mother when Michael showed flashes of his father's temper? Before I could respond, a hospital administrator appeared with forms for Jessica to sign. "We've arranged a room for you and your children," she explained. "And I understand there are some legal matters that need addressing." Jessica looked at me, panic flaring in her eyes. "I'll stay with you," I promised. "Whatever you need to do." The next few hours passed in a blur of hospital procedures, police statements, and the complex logistics of trauma. A victim's advocate arrived to help Jessica file for an emergency restraining order. The children eventually fell asleep, Emma on the small couch in Jessica's hospital room, Jacob curled against my chest in a rocking chair. As midnight approached, with Jessica finally resting under mild sedation, I sat alone with my sleeping grandson, the weight of the day settling over me like a heavy shroud. In the quiet darkness of that hospital room, something shifted inside me, a fundamental realignment of understanding. For decades, I had carried the weight of others' choices as my own burden. I had blamed myself for Robert's abandonment, wondering what I could have done differently to make him stay. I had worked myself to exhaustion trying to compensate for his absence in Michael's life, as if my love alone could fill that void. I had accepted without question my son's growing coldness, his criticism, his sudden rejection, assuming there must be some failure on my part that had caused it. But sitting there, watching my injured daughter-in-law sleep, my traumatized grandchildren curled in exhaustion, I saw with sudden crystalline clarity. I had not created this situation. This was not my failure. Robert had chosen to abandon his child. That was his decision, his moral failure, not mine. Michael had chosen to believe his absent father's lies over the lived truth of his present mother. That was his decision, his failure of judgment, not mine. And tonight, Michael had chosen violence. He had chosen to terrorize his wife and children, to hold a gun to his mother's head. Those were his choices, his actions, his responsibility. For the first time in my adult life, I allowed myself to release the crushing weight of unearned guilt. The sense of liberation was so profound it brought tears to my eyes. I had done everything humanly possible for my son. I had loved him with every fiber of my being. I had sacrificed my youth, my financial security, my personal desires, all to give him a better life than I had. And it had not been enough, not because I had failed, but because some wounds cannot be healed by a mother's love alone. Some poisons, once ingested, continue to spread despite all antidotes. Jacob stirred against my chest, his small hand clutching at my shirt. I looked down at his innocent face, seeing echoes of Michael as a baby, the same long eyelashes, the same curve to his cheek. My grandson deserved better than to grow up witnessing violence. My granddaughter deserved better than to live in fear of her father's rage. And Jessica, this young woman who had called me when she had no one else, who had trusted me with her children's safety, she deserved better than to be punished for reaching out for help. As for me, I deserved better too. The realization came like sunrise after a long, dark night. I deserved peace. I deserved respect. I deserved to be treated with basic human dignity by the child I had sacrificed everything for. My thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the door. The female officer from earlier, Officer Chen I'd learned, poked her head in. "Mrs. Mitchell, do you have a moment?" I carefully rose from the rocking chair, settling Jacob on the cushion without waking him, and stepped into the hallway. "How are they doing?" she asked, genuine concern in her voice. "As well as can be expected," I replied. "The children are asleep. Jessica's resting." Officer Chen nodded. "I wanted to update you on the situation with your son." I steeled myself. "Yes?" "He's been booked on multiple charges: domestic violence, assault, endangering the welfare of a child, and unlawful use of a weapon." She paused, her eyes compassionate. "He'll go before a judge tomorrow morning for arraignment. Given the severity of the charges and the presence of a firearm, it's unlikely he'll be released immediately." The word should have devastated me. My only child, facing serious criminal charges. But instead, I felt a strange calm. What happens next? The district attorney will pursue the case, especially with the restraining order in place. Your daughter-in-law will need to decide if she wants to press additional charges. Officer Chen hesitated. "I should warn you, Mrs. Mitchell. Your son made some concerning statements about you during processing. Let me guess, I said tiredly. He accused me of being mentally unstable, of harassing his family, of trying to turn his wife against him. Her surprised expression confirmed my suspicions. Those are the same accusations his father made about me when he left, I explained. History, repeating itself. Officer Chen studied me for a moment. Mrs. Mitchell, I've been a police officer for 15 years. I've responded to hundreds of domestic violence calls. What I've learned is that abusers rarely change their stories, just their targets. Her words resonated with something I'd been avoiding for years. The uncomfortable similarities between father and son, the patterns I'd tried not to see. We've also located your car, she continued. It's being processed as part of the investigation, since there's evidence related to the assault inside. I can arrange transportation for you and the family when they're released tomorrow. Thank you, I said, genuinely touched by her thoughtfulness. As she turned to leave, a question formed in my mind. Officer Chen, I called softly, in your experience, do situations like this ever get better? Do people change? She turned back, her expression grave, but not unkind. Sometimes, with serious intervention, court-mandated therapy, anger management, substance abuse treatment, but the person has to want to change. They have to recognize and take responsibility for their actions. She paused. And the victims have to protect themselves, regardless of whether that change happens or not. After she left, I stood in the hallway for a long moment, her words echoing in my mind. Protect themselves, regardless. Returning to the hospital room, I looked at my sleeping family, what remained of it, and made a silent vow. I would no longer enable Michael's behavior by accepting blame that wasn't mine. I would no longer make excuses for his cruelty. And most importantly, I would protect Jessica and my grandchildren, even if that meant protecting them from my own son. For decades, I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who sacrificed her own needs for family harmony. That woman, the one who would have begged Michael to forgive her for imagined wrongs, who would have taken on the burden of his rehabilitation, who would have blamed herself for his violence, died tonight in that kitchen with a gun to her head. In her place stood someone new, someone who saw clearly for the first time, someone who understood that love without boundaries isn't love at all, but self-destruction, someone who recognized that protecting others sometimes means standing against those who would harm them, even when those people share your blood. As dawn began to lighten the window of the hospital room, I moved to the small bathroom, splashing cold water on my face. The woman in the mirror looked different somehow. Older, perhaps. The lines of her face deeper after the night's ordeal. But her eyes were clear, steady, resolved. Enough, I whispered to my reflection. No more. It wasn't a decision made in anger or vengeance. It wasn't even about punishing Michael for what he'd done. It was simply the quiet recognition that some lines, once crossed, changed the landscape forever. My son had held a gun to my head, had beaten his wife, had terrified his children, had tried to manipulate the police into arresting his own mother on false charges. I couldn't undo what had happened. I couldn't fix my son with the sheer force of maternal love. That illusion had been shattered beyond repair. But I could protect what remained of our family. I could ensure that Emma and Jacob grew up in a home without violence. I could help Jessica rebuild her life without fear. And I could finally protect myself. As I stepped back into the hospital room, Jessica stirred, her eyes opening slowly. "Eleanor," she murmured, her voice thick with sleep and medication. "Is everything okay?" I moved to her bedside, taking her hand in mine. "Not yet," I said honestly, "but it will be." For the first time since this nightmare began, I truly believed those words. 3 days after that terrible night, Jessica, the children, and I stood in the driveway of my modest bungalow, watching the movers unload the essentials we'd managed to retrieve from the house on Oak Ridge Drive. Emma clutched her favorite stuffed rabbit, while Jacob clung to my leg, his eyes following each box with solemn curiosity. "Are we going to live with Grandma now?" Emma asked, looking up at Jessica. Jessica knelt beside her daughter, wincing slightly from the effort. Her bruises had deepened to a mottled purple, the cut above her eye now covered with a smaller bandage. "Yes, sweetheart. Just for a little while until we figure things out." I watched them, my heart both heavy and strangely light. The past 3 days had been a whirlwind of practical matters. Michael's arraignment, denied bail due to the severity of charges and potential flight risk. The emergency restraining order, granted for 6 months. retrieving essential belongings from the house, accompanied by police officers, and setting up my home to accommodate 3 additional people. Through it all, Jessica had shown remarkable strength. She had stood in that courtroom, her injuries still fresh, and testified to the abuse she had endured. She had looked my son in the eye, her husband of 8 years, and declared him a danger to herself and her children. She had not wavered, not even when Michael's court-appointed attorney had tried to paint her as unstable, exaggerating for attention. "Eleanor, are you sure this isn't too much?" Jessica asked now, breaking into my thoughts as the last of the boxes was carried inside. "We could try to find an apartment." "Absolutely not," I interrupted firmly. "My home is your home for as long as you need it. Besides," I added with a small smile, "I've been rattling around this place alone for too long. It's about time these walls heard children's laughter again." Jessica's eyes filled with tears. She stepped forward, hugging me carefully, mindful of Jacob still attached to my leg. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to," I assured her. "This is what family does. Real family." As we turned to go inside, a sleek black car pulled up to the curb. A tall man in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a leather briefcase. "Mrs. Eleanor Mitchell," he called, approaching us. "And Mrs. Jessica Mitchell?" Jessica instinctively moved closer to the children, her body tensing. After the events of the past few days, we were both wary of unexpected visitors. "Yes," I responded cautiously. "Can we help you?" He extended his hand. "Andrew Pearson, with Pearson, Whitaker, and Associates. I represent Robert Mitchell." The name hit me like a physical blow. Robert, Michael's father, the man who had abandoned us 30 years ago, the source of the poisonous lies that had corrupted my son's mind. "What does Robert want?" I asked coldly, ignoring his outstretched hand. The lawyer seemed unfazed by my hostility. "Mr. Mitchell has been made aware of the situation with your son. He would like to meet with you both." "Absolutely not," I said immediately, placing a protective arm around Jessica's shoulders. "Robert Mitchell has done enough damage to this family." Mr. Pearson's expression remained neutral. "Mr. Mitchell believed you might feel that way. He asked me to give you this." He reached into his briefcase, extracting a thick manila envelope. "He said it contains information you both should have before making any decisions about Michael's case." I stared at the envelope without taking it. "Whatever game Robert is playing, I'm not interested." "This isn't a game, Mrs. Mitchell," the lawyer said quietly. "Mr. Mitchell is very ill, terminal cancer. He has, at most, 3 months to live. He's putting his affairs in order, which includes addressing certain wrongs from his past." Jessica placed her hand on my arm. "Maybe we should at least look at what he sent," she suggested gently. After a moment's hesitation, I took the envelope. It was heavier than I expected. "Mr. Mitchell is staying at the Heathman Hotel, Suite 412, Mr. Pearson continued, handing me a business card. "He'll be there for the next week. If you decide to meet with him after reviewing those documents, please call me at this number." With a formal nod, he returned to his car and drove away, leaving us standing in the driveway with the mysterious envelope and even more questions than before. Inside, after settling the children with a snack and a movie in the living room, Jessica and I sat at my kitchen table and opened the envelope. It contained multiple documents, neatly organized with colored tabs. The first was a handwritten letter from Robert, dated 3 days ago. "Eleanor and Jessica, by now you are both aware of the situation with Michael. I bear significant responsibility for the man he has become, and the pain he has caused you both. The enclosed documents will explain part of what happened, though they cannot excuse it. For 30 years, I have lived with the knowledge of my worst mistakes. Now, facing my own mortality, I can no longer avoid accountability. Michael is my son, and I failed him in the most fundamental ways, first by leaving, then by poisoning him with lies, intended to absolve my own guilt. Please review these documents then, if you are willing, meet with me. I have information that may help you protect yourselves and the children in the difficult days ahead. I don't expect forgiveness. I only hope to prevent further harm. Robert Mitchell." I stared at the familiar handwriting, once as intimate to me as my own, now the script of a stranger. The bitter taste of 3 decades of abandonment rose in my throat. "Eleanor?" Jessica touched my hand gently. "Are you okay?" I shook my head, not trusting myself to speak. With trembling fingers, I turned to the next document. It was a psychiatric evaluation of Michael, dated 6 months ago, from a prominent psychiatrist in Chicago. Robert had apparently convinced Michael to undergo an assessment during one of his business trips. The diagnosis was chilling: narcissistic personality disorder with antisocial features, exacerbated by alcohol abuse. The psychiatrist had recommended immediate intensive therapy and had expressed concern about escalating patterns of control and potential violence in domestic situations. Michael had never mentioned this evaluation to Jessica, had never sought the recommended treatment. The next set of documents were transcripts of text messages between Robert and Michael spanning the past year. As I read through them, my blood ran cold. Far from encouraging Michael's delusions about me, the messages showed Robert repeatedly attempting to correct Michael's distorted narrative. "Michael, she's doing it again, trying to control everything with the kids, just like you said she did with you." "Robert, son, I've told you before, your mother was not controlling. I was the one who walked away. I was the one who couldn't handle the responsibility. Don't blame her for my failures." "Michael, but you said she drove you away, that she was manipulative." "Robert, I never said that. I said I told myself that to justify leaving. It was a lie I created to live with my guilt. Your mother was a good woman who deserved better than what I did to her." Message after message showed similar patterns. Michael twisting Robert's words, Robert trying to correct him, Michael ignoring those corrections to maintain his narrative of victimhood. The final section contained bank records, dozens of canceled checks made out to Eleanor Mitchell for child support, dating from shortly after Robert left us. Checks I had never received. Attached was a notarized affidavit from Robert's mother, Margaret Mitchell, confessing that she had intercepted and destroyed these checks and all correspondence from Robert to us, believing that a clean break would be better for everyone. My hands shook as I processed this information. The money that would have eased our desperate poverty. The communications that might have maintained some connection between Michael and his father, deliberately intercepted and destroyed by Robert's mother. All those years I'd thought Robert hadn't cared enough to provide for his son. He'd been sending support that never reached us. "Oh my God," Jessica whispered, reading over my shoulder. "This explains so much." It explained, but didn't excuse. Robert had still chosen to leave, had still started a new family without looking back, had still waited 30 years to reveal the truth. "There's something else," Jessica said, pulling out the last document from the envelope. A title deed to the house on Oak Ridge Drive. I frowned, confused. Why would he include this? Jessica scanned the document, her eyes widening. "Eleanor, look at this. The house isn't just in Michael's name. It's in yours too." I took the paper from her, my heart pounding. There it was in black and white. The house was legally co-owned by Michael Mitchell and Eleanor Mitchell, with a specific clause stating that the property could not be sold, mortgaged, or transferred without both owners' signatures. "I don't understand," I murmured. "Michael told me I was just helping with the down payment. He never mentioned putting my name on the deed." Jessica's expression was grim. "He lied to you, just like he lied to me about so many things." She hesitated. "But this means the house is half yours. Legally." The realization washed over me in waves. The house I'd been banned from, the home I'd helped create, where I'd painted nurseries and planted gardens, I owned half of it. The security Michael had promised me for my later years wasn't just an empty promise. It was a legal reality he had concealed. Why would he hide this from me? I wondered aloud. "Control," Jessica said simply. "It's always about control with Michael. If you knew you had legal rights to the house, he couldn't threaten to keep you away from us." Her voice softened. "And maybe, on some level, he felt guilty about taking your mother's money. This might have been his way of making sure you had something for your future." I sat back in my chair, trying to absorb the magnitude of these revelations. Robert, dying of cancer, attempting to make amends. Margaret Mitchell, deliberately sabotaging any connection between her son and grandson. Michael, diagnosed with a personality disorder that explained, if not excused, his escalating behavior. And the house, my legal right to the home I'd been forcibly removed from. "What do we do now?" Jessica asked quietly. I looked through the dining room doorway to the living room, where Emma and Jacob were curled together on the sofa, momentarily lost in the simple comfort of a children's movie. These innocent children, caught in a web of family dysfunction spanning generations. First, I said slowly, I think we need to meet with Robert, hear what else he has to say. Jessica nodded in agreement. And then, I picked up the title deed, a strange sense of power unfurling within me. For decades, I had believed myself powerless, at the mercy of Robert's abandonment, Michael's whims, circumstances beyond my control. But I had never truly been powerless. I had survived. I had persevered. I had built a life from nothing. And now, holding this document, I realized I had leverage I never knew existed. Then, I said, my voice stronger than it had been in days, we use whatever resources we have to protect the children and ourselves. I reached for my phone and dialed the number on the lawyer's business card. When he answered, my voice was clear and decisive. Mr. Pearson, this is Eleanor Mitchell. Jessica and I would like to meet with Robert tomorrow morning. As I hung up, Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. I'm scared, she admitted. So am I confessed. But I'm also done being a victim. For 30 years, I've carried the shame of Robert's abandonment, as if it reflected some failure in me. I've accepted Michael's treatment, because I thought that's what unconditional maternal love meant, enduring abuse without complaint. I shook my head firmly. No more. That evening, after the children were asleep in the guest room that had once been Michael's childhood bedroom, Jessica and I sat on my back porch, mugs of tea warming our hands against the cool spring evening. Can I ask you something? Jessica said hesitantly. Something personal? Of course. After everything Michael has done, after he held a gun to your head, how can you still help us? How can you not hate him? Hate all of us? I considered her question carefully, watching the steam rise from my mug. I don't hate Michael, I said finally. I grieve for him, for the sweet boy he was, for the good man he could have been. I looked at her directly. And you and the children aren't extensions of Michael. You're separate people who deserve safety and care. But he's your only child, she persisted. Your flesh and blood. Doesn't that mean you have to stand by him, no matter what? Being a parent doesn't mean unconditional support of harmful behavior, I said slowly, the realization crystallizing as I spoke. It means wanting what's truly best for your child, even when that's difficult, even when it means consequences. I paused. Michael needs help. Serious professional help, and he needs to face the consequences of his choices. Standing by him through that process doesn't mean enabling his abuse. Jessica nodded thoughtfully, wiping away a tear. I keep thinking about the children. How do I explain to them why their daddy can't see them? Why we left our home? We tell them the truth, in age-appropriate ways, I said gently. That daddy is sick right now, not with a cold, but with a sickness that makes him hurt people sometimes. That he needs special doctors to help him get better, that we love him, but we need to be safe while he works on getting well. And if he doesn't get well, Jessica whispered. The question hung in the night air between us, heavy with implication. Then we create a new normal, I said finally. One where you and the children are safe, supported, and loved. Later that night, alone in my bedroom, I opened the bottom drawer of my dresser and pulled out a small wooden box I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were the few mementos I'd kept from my marriage to Robert, our wedding photo, the hospital bracelet from Michael's birth, the last Valentine's card Robert had given me before leaving. I studied the young woman in the wedding photo, 22 years old, eyes bright with hope and dreams, unaware of the hardships that lay ahead. I didn't regret that young woman's choices. I didn't regret loving Robert, marrying him, having Michael. I didn't even regret the years of struggle that followed his departure, for they had forged me into someone stronger than I ever thought possible. What I regretted was allowing those hardships to convince me I deserved less respect, less consideration, less love. For too long, I had accepted scraps of affection from my son, pathetically grateful for whatever attention he deigned to give me, enduring his growing contempt, because I believed that was my lot as an abandoned woman, a single mother. No more. Tomorrow, I would face Robert Mitchell for the first time in 30 years. I would hear what he had to say. And then I would use every resource, every legal right, every ounce of newfound strength to ensure that the cycle of abuse ended with our generation. The children would not inherit this legacy of pain. I would make certain of it. I placed the box back in the drawer, no longer needing these fragments of the past. Whatever happened tomorrow, I would be facing it not as the abandoned wife, the sacrificing mother, the doormat grandmother, but as Eleanor Mitchell, a woman who had finally recognized her own worth and power. And that made all the difference. The Heathman Hotel lobby gleamed with understated elegance. Polished wood, soft lighting, discreet luxury. Jessica and I sat side by side on a velvet sofa, waiting for the elevator that would take us to Robert's suite. Though we'd arrived 15 minutes early, neither of us wanted to be late for this crucial meeting. "Are you ready for this?" Jessica asked softly, adjusting the silk scarf she wore to partially conceal her healing bruises. I smoothed my hands over my navy dress, the nicest one I owned, purchased years ago for Michael's college graduation. As ready as I'll ever be. The truth was, I didn't know how to prepare for facing the man who had abandoned me and my son 3 decades ago. The man whose absence had shaped so much of my life. The man whose lies, or at least whose truth twisted by our son, had culminated in violence and trauma. Last night, after our discovery of the documents, I'd called my oldest friend, Patricia, a family law attorney who had guided me through my divorce from Robert all those years ago. She had come to my house immediately, reviewing the papers with her practiced eye. "Eleanor, this changes everything," she'd said, tapping the title deed with her finger. "You have legal rights to that house that Michael can't override. And these psychiatric evaluations, they'll be crucial if Jessica decides to pursue divorce and custody proceedings." "What about the child support checks?" I'd asked. "Do they matter after all this time?" Patricia had shaken her head. "Legally, probably not. The statute of limitations has long expired. But morally," she'd fixed me with a knowing look, "it changes the narrative you've lived with, doesn't it?" It did. For 30 years, I had believed Robert had simply walked away, not caring if his child had food to eat or clothes to wear. I had believed he had chosen to erase us completely from his life. The truth, that he had attempted to provide support, that he had possibly tried to maintain contact, didn't erase his abandonment, but it shifted the landscape of our shared history. Now, sitting in the hotel lobby, I tried to prepare myself for whatever version of Robert would greet us. The bitter, selfish young man who had walked out on his family, the terminally ill older man seeking redemption, something in between. "The elevator's here," Jessica murmured, touching my arm gently. We rode up in silence, the soft ping of each passing floor marking our ascent toward this long-delayed confrontation. When we reached the 4th floor, Jessica squeezed my hand once, a gesture of solidarity, before the doors opened. Suite 412 was at the end of a hushed corridor. I knocked firmly, my heartbeat thundering in my ears. The door was opened not by Robert, but by his attorney, Andrew Pearson. "Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted us formally. "Thank you for coming. Please, come in." The suite was spacious and elegant, with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking downtown Portland. Seated in an armchair by the window was a man I barely recognized. Robert Mitchell, at 67, looked nothing like the handsome 30-year-old who had walked out of our lives. Cancer had whittled him down to a skeletal frame, his once thick dark hair now a sparse white covering. His skin had a grayish pallor, stretched tight over prominent cheekbones, but his eyes, those I recognized immediately, the same deep blue that had been passed down to Michael, and now to Emma. He struggled to his feet as we entered, leaning heavily on a wooden cane. "Eleanor," he said, his voice a raspy shadow of its former resonance. "Thank you for coming." For a moment, I couldn't speak. The rehearsed words of righteous anger evaporated in the face of his obvious frailty. This dying man could not hurt me anymore, had not perhaps been the monster I'd made him in my mind for 30 years. "Robert," I finally managed. "This is Jessica, Michael's wife." Jessica stepped forward, extending her hand politely. As she turned her face toward the light, her concealed bruises became more evident. Robert flinched visibly at the sight. "Please sit down," he said, gesturing to the sofa across from his chair. As we settled, he lowered himself back into his seat with obvious discomfort. "Can I offer you anything? Coffee? Tea?" I shook my head. "We didn't come for refreshments, Robert. We came for answers." He nodded slowly, direct as always. "It was one of the things I admired most about you, Eleanor." He clasped his thin hands in his lap. "Where would you like me to begin? Why did you leave?" The question that had haunted me for 30 years finally voiced aloud. Robert's gaze dropped to his hands. The simple answer: I was a coward. A selfish, immature coward who wasn't ready for the responsibilities of marriage and fatherhood. He looked back up at me. The more complicated answer involves my own father's abandonment, my undiagnosed anxiety disorder, my fear of becoming him. But those are explanations, not excuses. And the child support checks? I pressed. The letters? I sent them faithfully for 15 years, he confirmed. Every month. When they were returned or went unacknowledged, I assumed you were rejecting them out of anger. I didn't discover what my mother had done until after her death 5 years ago. His expression hardened momentarily. She confessed on her deathbed, apparently thinking I would absolve her. I did not. Why didn't you try harder to contact us? My voice cracked slightly. One phone call, one visit. I did, at first, he interrupted gently. Your number was changed. When I came to the apartment, you had moved with no forwarding address. My mother told me you had left the state. He shook his head. Again, not an excuse. I should have tried harder. Should have hired someone to find you. But after a while, it became easier to believe you and Michael were better off without me. I thought back to those first few months after Robert left. How I'd changed our phone number to stop his mother's harassing calls, blaming me for her son's departure. How we'd moved to a cheaper apartment when I could no longer afford the rent alone. How I deliberately avoided telling his parents where we were going, tired of their cruel comments about my fitness as a wife and mother. When did you reconnect with Michael? Jessica asked, speaking for the first time. Robert shifted in his chair, pain briefly contorting his features. He found me about a year ago, used a private investigator, showed up at my office in Chicago without warning. He smiled faintly. I nearly had a heart attack. It was like seeing a ghost. He looked so much like I did at his age. And you told him what, exactly? I asked, thinking of the poisonous narrative Michael had constructed. The truth, Robert said firmly. That I left because of my own failings, not yours. That you were a wonderful mother who deserved better than what I did to you both. His expression darkened. But from the beginning, Michael seemed determined to hear something else. He kept pushing for details about arguments we'd had, times you'd been controlling or manipulative. And you gave him those details? Jessica asked, a hint of accusation in her tone. Robert shook his head vehemently. No, I repeatedly corrected his assumptions. But the more I defended you, Eleanor, the more frustrated he became. It was as if he needed me to villainize you to justify his own growing resentment. My throat tightened. Why would he resent me? After everything I sacrificed for him? Perhaps because of everything you sacrificed, Robert suggested quietly. Children don't always respond to sacrifice with gratitude. Sometimes they respond with guilt, which can curdle into resentment over time. His insight struck me with unexpected force. Had my constant sacrifice, my relentless effort to compensate for Robert's absence, somehow become a burden to Michael? Had my determination to give him everything I never had unintentionally placed a weight of obligation on his shoulders that he couldn't bear? That doesn't excuse his behavior, Jessica said firmly, unconsciously touching her scarf-covered bruises. No, it doesn't, Robert agreed immediately. Nothing excuses abuse. Which brings me to why I asked you here today. He looked directly at Jessica. I understand my son is facing criminal charges, that there's a restraining order in place. Jessica nodded cautiously. Good, Robert said simply. He needs to face consequences for his actions, and you need protection from him. He reached for a folder on the side table, removing several documents. I've set up a trust for Emma and Jacob. The paperwork is here. It will provide for their education and basic needs, regardless of what happens with Michael. Jessica stared at him, speechless. I've also prepared a detailed affidavit, he continued, describing Michael's escalating behavior during our conversations over the past year, the concerning statements he made about both of you, my attempts to get him into treatment. This can be used in any future legal proceedings, custody, divorce, or criminal. I studied Robert's gaunt face, trying to reconcile this considerate, forthright man with the selfish coward who had abandoned us. Why are you doing this? Because I'm dying, he said matter-of-factly, and I want what time I have left to count for something good. He paused, his blue eyes, so like Michael's, so like Emma's, filling with tears. I failed as a father. I cannot change that, but I can try to protect my grandchildren from repeating the cycle of damage I began. Does Michael know you're helping us? Jessica asked. Robert shook his head. No, and he won't, until necessary. My lawyer will handle all communication regarding these matters. He turned to me then, his expression solemn. Eleanor, there's something else we need to discuss. About the house. I know my name is on the deed, I said, though Michael never told me. It was my suggestion, Robert admitted. When Michael mentioned buying the house, when he told me you were contributing your inheritance, I insisted your name be added to the title. It was the least I could do after all these years. He hesitated. But there's more. The mortgage isn't what Michael believes it to be. What do you mean? I asked, confused. The original purchase price was $750,000. Michael qualified for a mortgage of $500,000. Your contribution was $47,000. Robert looked slightly uncomfortable. I provided the remaining $203,000, but I asked the lender to structure it as if the full $703,000 came from the mortgage and your down payment. You contributed to our house? Jessica looked stunned. Michael never mentioned that, because he doesn't know, Robert said quietly. The money was channeled through a corporate account. As far as Michael knows, he qualified for the full mortgage amount. I struggled to process this information. Why would you do that? And why keep it secret? The why is simple. Guilt. 30 years of child support I thought you'd rejected but actually never received. As for keeping it secret, Robert sighed heavily. Michael was already defensive about accepting any help from me. Claiming credit would have derailed the purchase entirely. And I wanted you to have the security of home ownership, Eleanor. It seemed the least I could do. Andrew Pearson, who had been silently observing our conversation, stepped forward. There's a legal component to discuss, he said, opening his briefcase. Given the current situation, Robert would like to transfer his interest in the house entirely to you, Eleanor. This would give you controlling interest, approximately 65% ownership. I stared at Robert, bewildered by this unexpected turn. Why would you do that? Because Michael should not profit from abuse, he said simply. If Jessica decides to divorce him, which, frankly, I believe she should, the house would normally be divided as marital property. This way, you control what happens to it. You can ensure Jessica and the children have a place to live, or sell it, and use the proceeds to establish new, separate homes. Whatever you decide is best. Jessica reached for my hand, squeezing it tightly. I could feel her trembling. There's a condition, Robert added, his expression grave. I want access to my grandchildren before I die. Not unsupervised. I understand they don't know me, and I'm essentially a stranger. But I'd like the chance to meet them, at least once, in whatever setting you deem appropriate. The request hung in the air between us. I looked at Jessica, leaving the decision to her. They should know their grandfather, she said finally, especially since she didn't need to finish the sentence, especially since they might soon lose their father, either to prison or to his own demons. Robert nodded gratefully. Thank you. For the next hour, we worked through the practical details of the arrangements Robert was proposing. The trust for the children, the transfer of house ownership, the evidence he could provide for any future legal proceedings involving Michael. Throughout the discussion, I kept studying this man who had once been the center of my world, then the source of my greatest pain. The young Robert I had loved was gone, replaced by this frail, dying man seeking redemption in his final days. I couldn't forgive him entirely for the decades of hardship his abandonment had caused, but I could acknowledge his efforts now to right those ancient wrongs. As our meeting drew to a close, Robert asked for a moment alone with me. Jessica exchanged a look with me. Are you okay with this? And when I nodded, she stepped out with Andrew Pearson to review some final documentation in the adjacent room of the suite. When the door closed behind them, Robert leaned forward in his chair, wincing with the effort. Eleanor, there's something I need to say to you. Something I should have said 30 years ago. I steeled myself, uncertain what was coming. I'm sorry, he said simply, his voice breaking on the words. I'm so deeply, profoundly sorry for leaving you and Michael, for the hardship I caused, for the burden I placed on your shoulders, for the father I failed to be. The apology I had waited 3 decades to hear, delivered now, when it was almost too late to matter. And yet, hearing those words unlocked something within me, releasing a tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying all these years. I was so angry with you, Robert, I said quietly. For so long, I blamed you for every struggle, every sacrifice, every lonely moment. As you should have, he acknowledged. I deserved that blame. I shook my head slowly, but carrying that anger didn't hurt you. It only hurt me, and maybe indirectly, it hurt Michael too. All those years of being the abandoned wife, the heroic single mother. Maybe I needed that narrative too much. Maybe I didn't see what it was doing to him, to be cast as the victim in his father's desertion, the beneficiary of his mother's martyrdom. Robert's eyes filled with tears. You did the best you could in an impossible situation that I created. We all did the best we could, I said, surprising myself with the gentleness in my voice. Even you, in your flawed way. Even Michael, though his best, has caused tremendous harm. A silence fell between us. Not the tense, angry silence I might have imagined for this moment, but something quieter, more contemplative. Two people at the end of a long, painful journey, finding, if not peace, then at least understanding. "Will you tell Michael I'm dying?" Robert asked finally. I considered the question carefully. Michael was currently in county jail awaiting trial, refused bail due to the severity of his charges and the danger he posed. He had made no attempt to contact me or Jessica since his arrest. Yes, I decided. He deserves to know whatever else has happened between you. Robert nodded gratefully. Thank you. He hesitated. And will you bring the children to meet me? Soon? The doctors say I don't have much time. We will, I promised. Not for his sake, but for Emma and Jacob's. They deserve to know this piece of their history, this branch of their family tree, before it was too late. As Jessica and I left the hotel an hour later, legal documents securely in my handbag, I felt a strange sense of lightness. Not happiness exactly. The situation with Michael was still too painful, the future too uncertain for that, but a kind of liberation. For 30 years, Robert had been the villain in our family story, the heartless deserter whose absence had shaped everything that followed. The reality, as always, was more complex. He had been selfish, yes, cowardly, certainly, but also young, troubled, overwhelmed, and later, regretful, attempting in his limited way to make amends. Are you okay? Jessica asked as we walked to her car, a rental, since mine was still being held as evidence. I think I am, I said, surprising myself with the truth of it. For the first time in a very long time, Jessica drove us not to my house, but to Patricia's law office, where we had arranged to meet immediately after seeing Robert. For 3 hours, we sat with my old friend, reviewing the documents Robert had provided, discussing our legal options, developing a strategy for the challenging days ahead. Based on everything you've shown me, Patricia said finally, you're in a much stronger position than most women in your situation, Jessica. The house ownership, the trust for the children, Robert's affidavit about Michael's concerning behavior, the psychiatric evaluation, all of this provides leverage most abuse victims simply don't have. What about the criminal charges? I asked. Will these documents affect that case? Patricia nodded thoughtfully. The psychiatric evaluation could certainly influence sentencing, if it comes to that. It might push the court toward mandated treatment rather than just incarceration. She looked directly at Jessica. But first, you need to decide what you want. Do you want to stay married to Michael, contingent on his getting treatment? Or are you ready to file for divorce? Jessica's hand went unconsciously to her scarf, to the bruises hidden beneath. I don't think I can ever feel safe with him again, she said quietly. Not after what he did. Not after he threatened the children. Patricia's expression was compassionate but practical. Then we should file for divorce immediately, while he's in custody. It provides an additional layer of legal protection. As we left Patricia's office that afternoon, armed with a clear plan and the beginning of the necessary paperwork, I felt a sense of control I hadn't experienced since that terrible night when Jessica's panicked call had awakened me. What now? Jessica asked as we sat in the car, neither of us quite ready to return home yet. I thought of the documents in my bag, proof of house ownership, trust fund details, legal strategies. I thought of Robert, diminished but determined to right ancient wrongs before his death. I thought of Michael, sitting in a jail cell, perhaps finally confronting the consequences of his choices. Now, I said, a new resolve strengthening my voice, we take back our lives. We protect the children. We create safety and stability, with or without Michael. And if he fights us? Jessica asked, a tremor of fear in her voice. I placed my hand over hers on the steering wheel. Then we fight back. Not with violence or cruelty, but with truth, with documentation, with legal standing. I smiled grimly. He thought he held all the power. He was wrong. That night, after the children were asleep, Jessica and I sat at the kitchen table, a calendar spread between us, plotting out the next steps in our counteroffensive: divorce filing, custody arrangements, house decisions, therapy for the children, a restraining order extension. We weren't victims anymore, waiting for the next explosion, the next betrayal, the next threat. We were strategists, generals, protectors, mapping out a future where safety and peace, not fear and control, would be the guiding principles of our family. Michael had thought he could intimidate us into submission, had believed he could use the children as emotional hostages, had assumed his violence would ensure our silence and compliance. He had not counted on the steel in his mother's spine, forged through decades of solitary struggle. He had not anticipated the fierce protectiveness of his wife, awakened by the threat to her children. He had not expected the deathbed intervention of the father whose abandonment had scarred him. Most of all, he had not understood that true strength lies not in domination and control, but in the quiet, determined preservation of what matters most. And what mattered now, the only thing that truly mattered, was ensuring that Emma and Jacob grew up in a home free from fear, free from violence, free from the toxic legacy that had poisoned our family for 2 generations. Whatever it took, whatever resources we needed to marshal, whatever battles we needed to fight, we would do it. For them, for ourselves, for the future we all deserved. 2 months after that fateful night, I sat in the hushed courtroom, my back straight, my gaze steady. Beside me, Jessica held herself with similar composure, though I could feel the slight trembling of her hand where it rested against mine on the wooden bench. Across the aisle sat Michael, in a county jail jumpsuit, his attorney whispering urgently in his ear. He looked thinner, paler, his once confident posture diminished. He had not yet noticed us enter the courtroom. Today was his trial date, though there would be no trial. After weeks of legal maneuvering, the district attorney had offered a plea deal that Michael's attorney had urged him to accept. The charges had been reduced from multiple felonies to 2, domestic violence assault and unlawful use of a weapon. In exchange for his guilty plea, Michael would receive a suspended sentence of 5 years, mandatory inpatient treatment for his dual diagnosis of personality disorder and alcohol abuse, followed by 3 years of strict probation. If he failed to complete treatment, if he violated the permanent restraining order, if he contacted Jessica or the children or me without court approval, he would serve the full 5 years in state prison. It wasn't perfect justice, but it was, as Patricia had explained, the most practical outcome. A trial would have meant traumatic testimony, brutal cross-examination, and the uncertainty of a jury decision. This way, there was definitive accountability, mandatory treatment, and legal protections for all of us. As the judge entered and the proceedings began, Michael finally turned, scanning the courtroom. When his eyes landed on us, I saw a flicker of something cross his face. Surprise, confusion, perhaps even a hint of shame. The formalities proceeded with dry efficiency. The reading of charges, the explanation of rights waived by accepting a plea, the terms of the agreement. When asked if he understood these terms, Michael's voice was barely audible as he responded, "Yes, Your Honor. And how do you plead to the charges as read?" the judge asked. Michael hesitated, his attorney leaning in to whisper something. Finally, he cleared his throat. "Guilty, Your Honor." Those 2 words, an acknowledgement, however reluctant, of what he had done, sent a ripple of emotion through me. Not satisfaction or vindication, but a complex mixture of grief and relief. My son was admitting to crimes that had shattered our family, but in that admission lay the first glimmer of potential healing, the necessary foundation for any possible redemption. The judge outlined the sentencing terms, emphasizing the serious consequences if Michael failed to comply with treatment or violated the restraining order. "Do you understand that this is your only opportunity to avoid incarceration, Mr. Mitchell? That any failure to adhere to these terms will result in immediate activation of your 5-year sentence?" "I understand, Your Honor," Michael responded, his voice slightly stronger. "Then the court accepts your plea and the terms as described. You will be transferred to the Riverside Treatment Center tomorrow morning to begin your 18-month inpatient program." The judge's gaze was stern as he looked at Michael. I strongly suggest you take this opportunity seriously, Mr. Mitchell. The court is showing leniency today. Do not expect the same should you appear before me again." With a strike of the gavel, it was done. Deputies approached to escort Michael back to holding. As they guided him toward the door, he turned, his eyes finding mine across the courtroom. For a brief moment, we looked at each other, mother and son, once so close, now separated by violence, betrayal, and the cold formality of legal proceedings. In his eyes, I saw confusion, anger, and beneath it, a flicker of the lost boy he had always been, searching for something he couldn't name. I didn't smile. I didn't nod. I simply held his gaze steadily, letting him see that I was neither broken by his actions nor consumed with hatred for him. Then he was gone, led through the side door back to the holding cells. "Are you okay?" Jessica whispered as people began to file out of the courtroom. "Yes," I said, surprised to find it was true. "It's not an ending, but it's a beginning of sorts." We gathered our things, preparing to leave, when the courtroom door opened and Andrew Pearson, Robert's attorney, entered. His expression was solemn as he approached us. Mrs. Mitchell," he greeted us formally. "I'm afraid I have difficult news. Robert passed away last night. Though we had been expecting this, Robert's health had deteriorated rapidly in the weeks since our meeting. The finality of it still came as a shock." "Was he in pain?" I asked. Andrew shook his head. "No, he went peacefully, in his sleep." He handed me an envelope. "He asked me to give you this, in the event he didn't survive until the trial's conclusion." I took the envelope, feeling its weight in my hands. "Thank you for letting us know. There's one more thing," Andrew added. "Robert specified in his will that his ashes be divided, half to be scattered by his daughters in Chicago, half to be given to you, to do with as you see fit." He handed me a small wooden box, unexpectedly heavy. "His personal effects, the ones he wanted you to have been sent to your home." I held the box containing half of Robert's earthly remains, struck by the strange symmetry. In life, he had been divided between two families. In death, he remained so. "Did Michael know his father was dying?" Jessica asked quietly. "Yes," Andrew confirmed. "I visited him in jail last week at Robert's request. He was informed of the prognosis." He hesitated. He seemed affected by the news. As we left the courthouse, the bright June sunshine felt at odds with the gravity of the day's events. My son was headed to mandated treatment. My ex-husband was dead. The cycle of our family drama had reached an inflection point that none of us could have predicted 3 months ago. "What will you do with the ashes?" Jessica asked as we walked to the car. I looked down at the simple wooden box in my hands. "I'm not sure yet. Something appropriate. Something peaceful." That evening, after putting Emma and Jacob to bed with extra stories and cuddles, they had been staying with a neighbor during the court proceedings. Jessica and I sat in my backyard, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. On the table between us lay Robert's final letter, which I had read aloud to Jessica upon our return home. "Eleanor and Jessica, if you're reading this, I didn't make it to see the resolution of Michael's case. I hope the outcome provides you both, and especially the children, with the safety and peace you deserve. Eleanor, I've had a lifetime to reflect on my failures as a husband and father. Walking away from you and Michael was the greatest mistake of my life, one that set in motion consequences I never could have foreseen. I don't ask for forgiveness. I only hope that the measures I've put in place provide some small counterbalance to the damage I caused. Jessica, you've shown remarkable courage in protecting yourself and your children. In the brief time I knew you, I saw strength, compassion, and wisdom beyond your years. Whatever path you choose regarding your marriage to my son, know that you have my deepest respect and support, even beyond the grave. To you both, Michael is damaged in ways that mirror my own flaws, magnified and distorted through the lens of abandonment. This does not excuse his actions, but if there is to be any hope of healing, for him, for the children, for your family, it lies in breaking the cycle of trauma that began with me. The house on Oak Ridge Drive is now legally under Eleanor's majority control. My attorney has all the necessary documentation. Use this leverage wisely, not as a weapon, but as protection, as security for the future. For Emma and Jacob, I've left personal letters for each of them to be opened when they're older. Andrew will provide these when the time is right. I've also arranged college funds for each, separate from the trust I established earlier. Eleanor, if there is any justice in whatever comes after this life, I will spend eternity making amends for the pain I caused you. You deserve so much better than what I gave you. With profound regret and enduring respect. Robert. As twilight deepened around us, Jessica and I sat in contemplative silence, each processing the day's events in our own way. The finality of Robert's death, the uncertain future Michael faced in treatment, the decisions that still lay ahead for us. Have you decided what you're going to do about the house? Jessica asked finally, her voice soft in the gathering darkness. I had been considering this question carefully in the week since discovering my legal ownership. I think we should sell it, I said. Too many painful memories there now. For all of us. I looked at her directly. We can use the proceeds to buy 2 smaller places, one for you and the children, one for me. Close enough for easy visits, but separate households. Jessica nodded slowly. I think that's wise. A fresh start. She hesitated. But what if Michael completes treatment successfully? What if he genuinely changes? It was the question we had both been avoiding. The possibility, however remote, of reconciliation. Of Michael finding his way back from the darkness that had consumed him. Then we'll navigate that when the time comes, I said carefully. But we can't plan our lives around that possibility, Jessica. We have to move forward based on what is, not what might be. I know, she whispered. I just keep thinking about the children, about them growing up without their father. They won't grow up without him because he died, like Robert's absence in Michael's life, I reminded her gently. They'll grow up with limited contact with him because of choices he made. That's an important distinction for them to understand as they get older. Jessica nodded, wiping away a tear. You're right. I just never imagined this would be their story. None of us imagined this would be our story, I said, looking up at the first stars appearing in the darkening sky. But it is. And now we have to write the next chapters as best we can. The following morning brought an unexpected development. While Jessica took the children to their weekly therapy session, a routine we had established immediately after that terrible night, I remained at home to deal with some paperwork related to the house sale. The doorbell rang shortly after 10. When I opened it, I found myself facing Mrs. Peterson from across the street from the house on Oak Ridge Drive, the same neighbor who had watched with such undisguised curiosity as I left with the police officer that night. Eleanor, she greeted me, her expression a mixture of discomfort and determination. May I come in? I have something important to discuss with you. Warily, I invited her into the living room, offering coffee, which she declined. She perched on the edge of the sofa, clutching her handbag as if it might provide some protection. I'll come straight to the point, she said briskly. The neighborhood association is meeting tonight to discuss the situation with your son's house. There are concerns about property values, about the news coverage, about the police presence that night. She cleared her throat. Several neighbors feel that having the house sit empty is creating a negative impression. There's talk of asking you and Jessica to either move back or put it on the market immediately. I stared at her, momentarily speechless. After everything we had endured, the violence, the trauma, the legal battles, the neighborhood association was concerned about property values. Mrs. Peterson, I said finally, my voice carefully controlled. Are you telling me that your primary concern about my son assaulting his wife, threatening his children, and holding a gun to my head is how it might affect real estate prices? She had the grace to flush. Of course not. We're all very concerned about Jessica and the children. About you too, naturally. It's just that you'd prefer to erase the unpleasantness as quickly as possible. I finished for her. To pretend nothing happened in that beautiful house on your perfect street. That's not fair, she protested. We're simply... No, I interrupted, a lifetime of suppressed anger suddenly finding its voice. What's not fair is treating domestic violence like an inconvenient eyesore. What's not fair is caring more about property values than human lives. What's not fair is watching your neighbor being led away in handcuffs and then gossiping about it over garden fences, instead of asking if his wife and children are safe. Mrs. Peterson looked stunned by my outburst. Eleanor, the house is being listed for sale next week, I continued, rising to my feet. You can tell the neighborhood association that their property values will be protected, but you can also tell them this: what happened in that house wasn't just a private tragedy. It was enabled by a culture of silence, by neighbors who saw signs of trouble and looked the other way, by a community more concerned with appearances than with the suffering in their midst. She stood too, clearly eager to escape my unexpected fury. "I'll just tell them the house is going on the market," she said, edging toward the door. "That should address their concerns." I followed her, not finished yet. "One more thing, Mrs. Peterson. When the house is listed, Jessica and I will be fully transparent about its history. No secrets, no cover-ups. Potential buyers deserve to know what happened there, even if the neighborhood would prefer to pretend it didn't." Her expression of horror would have been comical under other circumstances, but that will drastically reduce the selling price. No one wants to buy a house where something like that happened. Then perhaps it will serve as a reminder, I said quietly, opening the door for her, that beautiful facades sometimes hide ugly truths, that what happens behind closed doors matters more than what the neighbors think, that there are worse things than declining property values. After she left, I stood in my living room, trembling slightly with the aftermath of unexpected emotion. In all the years of raising Michael alone, of enduring Robert's abandonment, of sacrificing for my family, I had rarely allowed myself the luxury of anger. I had been the peacemaker, the one who smoothed things over, who accepted slights and injuries without complaint. But something had shifted in me since that night with the gun against my temple. The old Eleanor, the one who would have apologized to Mrs. Peterson for the inconvenience, who would have promised to handle the house sale discreetly to protect neighborhood sensibilities, was gone. In her place stood someone who recognized that silence and accommodation sometimes enable further harm, someone who understood that righteous anger has its place in the moral universe. When Jessica returned with the children, I told her about Mrs. Peterson's visit and my response. Instead of the dismay I half expected, she laughed, a genuine, full-throated laugh I hadn't heard from her in months. "God, I wish I could have seen her face," she said, wiping tears of mirth from her eyes. "The neighborhood association has been the bane of my existence for 3 years. The citations for grass half an inch too tall, the complaints about Emma's swing set being visible from the street, the passive-aggressive notes about garbage cans left out too long." She shook her head. "To think that after everything they're worried about property values." Her laughter was contagious, and soon I joined in, releasing tension I hadn't realized I'd been carrying. Emma and Jacob looked at us curiously, then began giggling too, though they didn't understand the joke. For a moment, our small living room filled with the sound of joy, unexpected, perhaps inappropriate given all we'd been through, but healing nonetheless. Later that week, as promised, we listed the house on Oak Ridge Drive for sale. The listing included a simple, factual disclosure about the domestic violence incident that had occurred on the property. No lurid details, but no euphemisms either. Just the truth, presented clearly and without apology. To the neighborhood association's horror, and our real estate agent's surprise, the house sold within 2 weeks to a young attorney specializing in domestic violence cases, who planned to donate a portion of her time to providing legal services to abused women who couldn't afford representation. When she called to ask if we would consider leaving the swing set for her own young daughter, Jessica and I exchanged a look of quiet satisfaction. The house that had been the site of such pain would now become a home where justice was pursued, where a little girl could swing without criticism, where the truth was valued above appearances. With the proceeds from the sale, we did exactly as planned. Purchased 2 small houses in the same school district, just 10 minutes apart. Jessica and the children moved into a bright Craftsman with a fenced backyard, perfect for Emma and Jacob to play safely. I chose a cozy bungalow with a garden where I could finally plant the roses I'd always wanted, free from the constraints of someone else's property, someone else's expectations. The day we signed the paperwork for our new homes, finalizing the division of proceeds from the Oak Ridge Drive sale, Jessica reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "Thank you," she said simply, "for everything." I squeezed back, grateful beyond words for this daughter-in-law who had become something more. A partner, a co-survivor, family in the truest sense of the word. "We did this together," I reminded her, "and we'll keep doing it together, whatever comes next." What came next was uncertain. Michael was 3 months into his mandated treatment program, sending carefully worded letters vetted by his therapists, letters that showed glimpses of insight alongside continuing denial and deflection. Jessica had filed for divorce, a process proceeding with the same steady, inexorable pace as the criminal justice system that had sentenced Michael. The children were adapting, as children do, Emma asking difficult questions about her father that we answered with age-appropriate honesty. Jacob too young to fully comprehend the changes, but sensing the shift in emotional weather around him. Both attended play therapy weekly, their resilience a constant source of hope in our altered landscape. As for me, I was learning to inhabit this new version of myself, no longer defined primarily as Michael's sacrificing mother or Robert's abandoned wife, but as Eleanor Mitchell, a woman standing firmly on her own foundations. I had returned to part-time work at the Literacy Center, finding joy in helping others find their voices through words. I had joined a support group for family members of those with personality disorders, where I both received and offered wisdom born of hard experience. And I had finally decided what to do with Robert's ashes. On a clear autumn day, Jessica, the children, and I drove to the Columbia River Gorge, to a viewpoint overlooking the magnificent landscape of water, forest, and stone. Emma and Jacob collected wildflowers while Jessica and I found a quiet spot away from the tourist crowds. "Are you sure you want us here for this?" Jessica asked as I removed the wooden box from my bag. "It seems so personal. You are my family," I said simply. "All of you. This feels right." Together we opened the box and released Robert's ashes to the wind, watching as they caught the currents and dispersed across the vast gorge. I spoke no words of forgiveness or condemnation. None seemed adequate for the complex reality of who Robert had been, of what our shared history contained. Instead, I simply acknowledged the truth, that this man had been part of the tapestry of my life, that his choices, both the abandonment decades ago and the attempt at amends at the end, had helped shape who I had become, not defined me, but influenced the pattern, for better and worse. As we turned to leave, Emma looked up at me with her clear blue eyes, Robert's eyes, Michael's eyes, but uniquely her own. "Grandma, was that your husband who died? The one who was Daddy's dad?" "Yes, sweetheart," I said gently. "That was your grandfather." She considered this with the solemn concentration only a child can bring to life's greatest mysteries. Was he a good person or a bad person? The simplicity of her question belied its profound complexity. How to explain to a 4-year-old the moral ambiguity of human existence? The capacity we all have for both harm and healing? "He was a person," I said finally, kneeling to her level. "Like all people, he made mistakes. He hurt others sometimes. But he also tried to make things right, especially at the end of his life. And without him, we wouldn't have you or Jacob, which means the world had more good in it because he was here." Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. Taking my hand in her small one, she led me back toward the car, where Jessica waited with Jacob. The future stretched before us, uncertain, challenging, but also full of possibility. Not the future any of us had imagined, but the one we now had the courage to create, together. In that moment, walking hand in hand with my granddaughter, I felt a sense of peace I had not known in decades. Not because everything was resolved. It wasn't, and might never be. Not because the pain of the past had been erased. It hadn't, and couldn't be. But because I had finally learned the lesson that had eluded me for so long. That true strength lies not in endless sacrifice or silent endurance, but in the courage to stand firmly in one's truth, to protect what matters most, and to forge a path forward, even when the way seems impossible. My son had banned me from his house, had held a gun to my head, had tried to destroy everything I held dear. But in doing so, he had inadvertently set me free from the patterns that had constrained me for a lifetime, had forced me to find a power within myself I never knew existed. And for that, paradoxically, I found myself grateful. 5 years have passed since that night when my phone rang in the darkness, when Jessica's terrified voice pulled me from sleep and into a nightmare that would forever alter the course of our lives. 5 years of healing, of rebuilding, of creating something new from the wreckage of what was lost. I sit on my front porch swing, watching the summer twilight settle over my garden. The roses I planted when I first moved here have flourished, climbing the trellis in riotous blooms of crimson and pink. My little bungalow has become truly mine, in a way no previous home ever was. Every color choice, every piece of furniture, every plant in the garden a reflection of my own taste, my own preferences, unconstrained by others' needs or expectations. From inside comes the sound of laughter. Emma, now 9, helping Jessica bake cookies in my kitchen. Jacob, 7, is sprawled on the living room floor with his Lego creations, constructing elaborate spacecraft with focused intensity. Friday night sleepovers at Grandma's house have become our cherished tradition, a constant in lives that have seen more change than any of us could have anticipated. Jessica emerges from the house, wiping flour from her hands on a dish towel, and joins me on the swing. At 37, she has blossomed into a woman of remarkable strength and grace. The trauma of that night left its scars, visible and invisible, but she has refused to let it define her. "The cookies will be ready in 10 minutes, she says, settling beside me. Emma insisted on adding extra chocolate chips. Of course she did, I laugh. She's her mother's daughter. Jessica smiles, looking out at the garden bathed in golden evening light. I got a call from Michael's probation officer today, she says, her voice carefully neutral. Oh? I keep my tone equally measured, though my heart beats a little faster. My son's name is no longer a forbidden topic between us, but it remains one approached with caution. He's maintained sobriety for 2 years now, completed his anger management recertification, kept the same job for 18 months. Jessica recites these facts without emotion, as if reading from a report, which in a sense she is. The officer thinks he's genuinely committed to his recovery this time. This is not new information exactly. Since completing his 18 months of inpatient treatment 4 years ago, Michael has moved through various stages of supervised release, outpatient therapy, and probation. There have been setbacks, a failed drug test 3 years ago that nearly sent him back to prison, a restraining order violation when he drove past Jessica's house 2 years ago, but also gradual, halting progress. That's good, I say simply. I hope it continues. Jessica nods. We both know better than to invest too much in these reports, having weathered too many cycles of improvement and relapse to trust completely in any upward trend. He's asked again about seeing the children, she continues, the real purpose of this conversation emerging. His therapist sent a formal recommendation supporting supervised visitation. I study her face, looking for clues to her thoughts on this perennial, painful question. The court has left the decision largely in Jessica's hands, requiring Michael to meet certain benchmarks before visitation could even be considered, but ultimately respecting her judgment as the custodial parent. What do you think? I ask carefully. Are you considering it? She sighs, pushing the swing gently with one foot. Emma asks about him sometimes. She has memories, not all bad ones. Jacob barely remembers him at all. She turns to me. What would you do if it were your decision? The question is hypothetical. We both know this is ultimately Jessica's choice to make. But after 5 years of navigating these waters together, she values my perspective, just as I respect her authority as the children's mother. I think, I say slowly, that children eventually need to know their own story, to understand where they come from, even the difficult parts, especially the difficult parts. I pause, but that doesn't mean rushing into something before they're ready, or before Michael is truly ready. Jessica nods, having arrived at similar thinking herself. The therapist suggested starting with letters, then perhaps video calls. Actual visits would be much further down the road, and always supervised by a court-appointed monitor. That sounds appropriately cautious, I agree, and it gives you the ability to stop the process if anything feels wrong. Emma's therapist thinks it might help her process some of her memories, Jessica adds. Give her a way to reconcile the father she remembers from before with what happened that night. The screen door creaks open, and Emma pokes her head out. Mom, Grandma, the timer's beeping. Coming, sweetheart, Jessica calls, rising from the swing. She pauses, looking down at me. We don't have to decide anything tonight. I just wanted you to know what's being discussed. I appreciate that, I tell her sincerely. Our relationship has evolved into a true partnership over these 5 years. Sometimes I am the supporter, sometimes the supported, but always we face these challenges together. After cookies and milk, after stories and tucking in, after the house grows quiet with the deep breathing of sleeping children, I return to the porch alone. The night has fully settled now, stars emerging in the clear summer sky. From this quiet vantage point, I reflect on the long, winding path that has brought us here. Michael's journey through the criminal justice and mental health systems has been neither straightforward nor entirely successful. The dual diagnosis of narcissistic personality disorder and alcohol dependence proved a challenging combination to treat. His initial compliance with the court-mandated program seemed more motivated by avoiding prison than by genuine insight. The first year after his release from inpatient treatment was particularly difficult. Living in a halfway house, struggling to find employment with his criminal record, he alternated between victim mentality and flashes of the same anger that had erupted that night. His supervised visits with his probation officer often devolved into complaints about the unfairness of his situation, the excessive restrictions placed upon him. Then came the failed drug test, the night spent in jail, the stern warning from the judge that any further violations would activate his suspended sentence. Something about that brush with returning to prison seemed to finally break through his defenses. His therapist later described it as a moment of clarity, the realization that his choices, not others' actions, had created his current reality. Slowly, painfully, he began to engage more genuinely with his treatment, started attending AA meetings without being required to, found a job at a warehouse where the owner believed in second chances, moved into a small apartment where he lived alone, learning to manage his emotions without the crutch of alcohol or the target of a spouse. Our relationship has been even more complicated to navigate. For the first 2 years after his release, I maintained distance, communicating only through his treatment team when absolutely necessary. The memory of the gun against my temple, of his attempts to have me falsely arrested, created a barrier I wasn't yet ready to cross. But 3 years ago, on my 66th birthday, a letter arrived. Unlike his previous communications, defensive, self-justifying, focused on his hardships, this one was different. Simple, direct acknowledgement of the harm he had caused. No excuses, no deflection, no subtle blame shifting. Just accountability, followed by the statement that he would understand if I never wanted contact with him again. I didn't respond immediately, carried the letter with me for weeks, reading and rereading it, searching for the hidden manipulations I had learned to detect in his words. Finding none, I eventually sent a brief reply. Not forgiveness, not reconciliation, but acknowledgement. An opening of a door that had seemed permanently closed. Since then, we have exchanged occasional letters, had 3 carefully structured phone calls, and met in person exactly once, in a public park with his therapist present, for exactly 1 hour. Our relationship, if it can be called that, is a fragile construction of boundaries, caution, and the tentative hope that healing, however partial, might be possible. I do not expect to ever fully trust him again. Do not anticipate the easy affection that once flowed between us. But I have come to believe that maintaining some connection, distant, protected, carefully managed, serves us both better than complete estrangement. Jessica's path has been one of remarkable resilience and growth. After the divorce was finalized, Michael offering no contest to any of her claims or requests, she took time to focus solely on healing herself and stabilizing the children. Then, gradually, she began to rebuild her life. She returned to school, completing the dental hygiene program she had abandoned when Emma was born, found a position at a pediatric dental practice that offered flexible hours compatible with single parenthood, developed friendships with other single mothers in similar circumstances, creating a support network that supplemented the foundation we had built together. 3 years ago, she began dating again. Cautiously, selectively, with the children's well-being always her primary concern. The man she has been seeing for the past year, David, is kind, patient, and respectful of the complex dynamics of our family situation. He understands that Jessica's trust comes slowly, earned through consistent actions rather than grand declarations. He has formed genuine bonds with Emma and Jacob, never attempting to replace their father, but offering a different model of masculine care and support. I like him, this quiet man with the gentle eyes who asks the children about their interests and remembers their answers, who helps Jessica carry her burdens without trying to control her decisions. Whether their relationship develops into something permanent remains to be seen, but I am grateful for the healing his presence has brought to their lives. As for me, Eleanor Mitchell, once defined primarily as Michael's mother, as Robert's abandoned wife, as the woman who sacrificed everything for others, I have discovered that life can offer new beginnings even in its 7th decade. After 35 years as a school librarian, I have found a second calling as a volunteer coordinator for a domestic violence shelter, where my firsthand understanding of family trauma helps me connect with women navigating their own difficult journeys. 3 days a week, I work with these survivors, arranging legal assistance, housing support, job training, all the practical necessities of rebuilding a life shattered by violence. I've developed friendships that nourish my spirit, joined a book club that challenges my thinking, even traveled a little. Weekend trips to the coast, a memorable 2-week tour of the national parks with my friend Patricia, who has become both legal advisor and confidant through all these changes. Most surprisingly, at 68, I have found unexpected companionship with James, a retired English professor who leads the poetry workshop at the Literacy Center, where I still volunteer on Saturdays. Our relationship is comfortable, undemanding, 2 people with full lives choosing to share parts of those lives with each other, without the desperate need or codependence that characterized my youth. We attend concerts together, share meals and conversations, enjoy the simple pleasure of reading silently in the same room. He understands the complexity of my family situation, respects my independence, appreciates the woman I have become through all my trials. Whether this late-life connection evolves into something deeper is less important than the joy it brings to my present. The sound of the screen door opening pulls me from my reflections. Jacob stands there in his dinosaur pajamas, rubbing his eyes sleepily. "Grandma?" he whispers. "I had a dream." I open my arms, and he climbs onto my lap, his warm weight settling against me. "Was it a scary dream?" I ask, stroking his dark hair, so like Michael's at this age. He shakes his head. "Not scary, just weird. There was a man who looked like me, but older. He was sad. He wanted to tell me something, but I woke up. My heart constricts, recognizing this dream for what it likely represents. Jacob's unconscious processing of the father he barely remembers, whose absence shapes his life in ways he cannot yet articulate. Dreams can be confusing, I say gently, but they're just our minds thinking about things while we sleep. "Do you think the man was my dad?" he asks with the direct simplicity of childhood. Mom has pictures of him in her special box. I consider my answer carefully. Jessica and I have always tried to be truthful with the children about their father, in age-appropriate ways. They know he did something that scared their mother, that he had to go away to get special help for being too angry, that he's not allowed to see them right now because of rules made by judges to keep everyone safe. It might have been, I acknowledge. Your mind knows what he looks like from the pictures, and sometimes dreams mix up our memories and thoughts. Jacob is quiet for a moment, his small fingers playing with the button on my cardigan. "Is he bad?" he asks finally. "Is that why we don't see him?" "No, sweetheart," I say, choosing my words with great care. "People aren't all good or all bad. Your dad did some very wrong things that hurt your mom and scared all of us. He's had to face consequences for those choices, and he's been working to learn better ways to handle his feelings." I hug him gently, but he's not a bad person. He's someone who made serious mistakes and has been trying to fix them. Jacob considers this explanation, his young mind grappling with concepts many adults struggle to understand. Like when I broke Mom's favorite vase and had to use my allowance to help buy a new one. Something like that, I say, smiling at his attempt to make sense of adult complexities through his own experience. But bigger mistakes with bigger consequences. Mom says maybe someday we might get letters from him, Jacob continues, or talk to him on the computer. So Jessica has already begun preparing them for the possibility of contact. It doesn't surprise me. She has always been thoughtful about managing transitions for the children. "Would you like that?" I ask neutrally. He shrugs, a gesture of uncertainty beyond his years. "I don't know. I don't really remember him. Emma does, though. She talks about him sometimes when Mom's not listening." This, too, doesn't surprise me. Emma's memories of her father include 4 years of normalcy before that final year of escalating control and violence. Her relationship to his absence is necessarily different from Jacob's, who was only 2 when everything fell apart. "It's okay not to know how you feel about it," I assure him. "And whatever you feel, curious, scared, angry, sad, that's okay too. You can always talk to me or your mom about it." "I know," he says, nestling closer. "Can I stay here with you for a little while?" Of course. We rock gently on the porch swing, my grandson and I, beneath the canopy of stars. Eventually, his breathing deepens as he drifts back to sleep in my arms. I sit there, holding him, savoring the weight and warmth of this precious child, a life touched by trauma, but not defined by it, a future still unfolding with all its infinite possibilities. When I carry him back to bed, tucking him beside his sister, I pause to look at these two sleeping children, my grandchildren, my heart's delight, the future of our family. Despite everything that has happened, despite all the pain and loss, they are thriving, resilient, loving, secure in the knowledge that they are protected and cherished. This, I realize, is the true measure of our success. Not that we have found perfect resolution or complete healing. Those absolutes rarely exist in human experience. Not that the past has been erased, or that all wounds have been seamlessly mended, but that we have created, from the wreckage of what was broken, something strong enough to sustain these young lives, something durable enough to weather whatever storms may still come. As I close their door softly, I think about the question Jessica asked earlier, whether to allow Michael back into their lives in some limited, carefully structured way. There is no perfect answer, no risk-free path forward. Either choice carries potential for both healing and harm, but I trust Jessica's judgment, honed through 5 years of single parenting, therapy, and the hard-earned wisdom of survival. Whatever she decides, we will face it together, as we have faced every challenge since that night when her desperate call shattered the silence of my bedroom. Returning to the porch, I look out at the night sky, at the garden I have tenderly cultivated, at the life I have built from the fragments of what was lost. At 68, I am not the woman I expected to be. The path that brought me here is not one I would have chosen. The losses I have endured are real and lasting. But there is beauty in this unexpected life, strength in the bonds forged through shared struggle, wisdom in the hard-won lessons of survival, joy in the simple gift of watching my grandchildren grow, of tending my garden, of finding connection and purpose in my 7th decade. My son banned me from his house, held a gun to my head, tried to destroy everything I had built. But in doing so, he inadvertently set me free from patterns of sacrifice and accommodation that had constrained me for decades, forced me to find a power within myself I never knew existed, compelled me to create boundaries I had never dared establish. I would never thank him for the trauma he inflicted, never pretend that violence was necessary for transformation. But I can acknowledge that from those darkest moments came unexpected light, the discovery of my own resilience, the forging of new and healthier bonds, the creation of a life truly my own. As I settle back into the porch swing, I feel a profound sense of peace wash over me. Not because everything is resolved. It isn't, and may never be. Not because the past has been erased or fully healed. Some scars remain permanent reminders of what was endured. But because I have finally learned to embrace the truth that eluded me for so long, that we are not defined by what happens to us, but by how we respond. Not measured by the perfection of our families or the absence of struggle, but by the courage with which we face each day. My phone buzzes with a text from Jessica. "Everyone asleep? Need anything before I turn in?" I smile, typing back, "All good. Jacob had a dream. We talked. He's back in bed now." Her reply comes quickly. "Thank you for everything. Not just tonight, for these 5 years, for showing us how to survive and then how to thrive. Love you." 3 simple words that contain a world of meaning. Love you. Not the desperate, sacrificial love that consumed my youth. Not the conditional love I once mistook for strength, but a love built on mutual respect, shared struggle, and the deep understanding that comes only from walking through fire together and emerging, changed but undefeated on the other side. "Love you too," I type back. "Sweet dreams." Setting the phone aside, I close my eyes and feel the gentle night breeze against my face. Whatever tomorrow brings, whatever decisions about Michael's place in our lives, whatever new challenges may arise, we will face it together, not as victims, but as survivors, not defined by our wounds, but by the strength with which we have healed them. This is my story, not the one I would have chosen, but the one I have lived. Not a fairy tale of perfect resolution, but a human narrative of resilience and renewal. The story of a woman who, in her 7th decade, finally discovered the most important truth, that it is never too late to reclaim your power, to rewrite your narrative, to begin again. My name is Eleanor Mitchell, and I am no longer afraid.